Good evening. I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the Town of Superior Board of Trustees, the Superior McCaslin Interchange Metropolitan District Board of Directors, the Superior Metropolitan District Number 1 Board of Directors, and the Superior Urban Renewal Authority Board of Commissioners. Could we all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Phyllis, could we have the roll call, please?
Mayor Clint Folsom.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Mark Lysis.
Here.
Trustee Sandy Hammerly.
Here.
Ken Lish.
Here.
Kevin Ryan. Neil Shaw.
Here.
Laura Swazinski.
Here.
Town Manager Matt Madley.
Here.
Town Attorney Kendra Carberry.
Here.
Town Clerk Phyllis Harden here.
Thank you. Next is the approval of the agenda. Do we have any items on the consent agenda that board members would like to pull?
I'd like to pull the Vargas contract.
Okay. Trustee Shaw would like to pull 4G. Any other changes? Okay. With that, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda. That's motion by Trustee Skrzyński, second by Mayor Pro Tem Lysis. All those in favor? Passes unanimous. All right, next is 2D, public comment on consent agenda presentations or non-agenda items. We don't have any presentations this evening, and we do have a couple of agenda items that you may be here to speak on. And so if you would like to speak on those, you can either speak now or at the agenda item itself. We'll have an opportunity for public comment then. So we'll go ahead with public comment first and your second. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening. My name's Sean Madej. I live at 946 Chavano Peak Drive with my wife and 3 daughters. I'd like to make a comment on a non-agenda item, if I may. Last week, I had an opportunity to present at a City of Cupertino, California, Technology Information and Communication Commission meeting, the TIC as they call it. Cupertino's TIC is a municipal body focused on advising the City Council on a wide range of technology and telecommunications topics. The members of the commission are local citizens appointed by the City Council of Cupertino to review opportunities related to software, hardware, and data. I would love to see Superior tap into the unique expertise of our local neighbors for establishing this type of advisory body. Many aspects of municipal government today have a nexus to technology. There's prevailing opportunities related to smart cities, municipal fiber, 5G, and artificial intelligence on the horizon for our town. Town staff is regularly dealing with matters related to civic engagement, public transparency, collaboration, even cybersecurity. The consideration of technology and its implications for the administration of this town are every bit as important as the significant deliberation that Superior already invests in issues related to open space, transportation, recreation, environmental sustainability, culture, and local history. Superior is situated just miles from large regional offices for tech giants like Google and Amazon, Oracle, Twitter. The employees of these innovative companies live in this bedroom community. Let's tap into their expertise and contemplate ways that Superior can seize the technological opportunities ahead of us. I ask that in the weeks ahead you consider creating a technology advisory committee for the town of Superior. I ask that you seize this opportunity to embrace digital transformation and implement forward-thinking technology policy. Certainly many of the municipal issues you examine are related in some way to technology, and town board meetings just don't afford enough time to kind of fully consider the complexity inherent in these nuanced matters. We have an opportunity to make technology foundational to the comprehensive planning that this town does and the growth and development we have ahead of us. Let's forge a civic undertaking related to technology in this community and kind of set a new standard for Boulder County. So I really appreciate your time, and thanks for all you do for this great little town.
Thank you. Additional public comment? Gladys?
Gladys Forshey, 404 South 3rd Avenue. I have a prepared statement. Phyllis, I would like to have this put in hard copy and not just comments. You're discussing an agenda item tonight, original town undergrounding. Thank you, Trustee Neal, for coming, and we did an original town alley tour regarding such hazardous stated scenario. Finally, someone is listening and not bullying we original town residents. Number one, Superior Metropolitan District Number 1 was created regarding Original Town and Rock Creek infrastructure. I have multiple original newspaper clippings stating such. This one is from 11/28 of 1990. Number two, the 2020 Town of Superior, Boulder County, Colorado, USA budget has surplus funds regarding infrastructure for Superior Metropolitan District Number 1. 3, use those funds for Original Town residents' monies, fees regarding the power line burial scenario this year, not 4 or 5 years from now. Absolutely no new local improvement district. Monies that we residents have been paying over the years are in these surplus funds. I will spare you any more of my comments regarding staff direction, pulling of original documents. These newspaper originals speak for the fact. And you know I have much more to say on this subject.
Okay, thank you. Additional public comment? Any additional public comment? All right, again, we'll have additional opportunity for public comment during the various agenda items if you'd like to. All right, we'll move on to presentations, which you have none, and no advisory committee reports this evening. Next item on our agenda is advisory committee interviews. We've got 2, Rainier Kuntz for OSAC and Stephen Sane for ACES.
Yes, that's correct, Mayor. We have 2 tonight, and then we have, I think, 3 next meeting as well. So
Okay.
We'll probably appoint on the 10th, I think, once we get all the interviews done.
Okay, very good.
I think we'll start with Rainier. Thanks. Yes, please.
Yes, welcome, and thank you for your interest and application. If you wanted to start with a brief introduction of yourself.
Okay, my name is Rainer Kunz. Live in 416 Promenade Drive in the new downtown. Actually, the new downtown development is what brought me here, so to speak. I live since 18 years in Colorado, 15 years of that in Boulder, city of Boulder. I'm a high-tech executive, have been doing various roles in my life, worked for Apple Computer in the computer business, worked for Boulder, founded a Boulder startup in quantum physics and quantum computing. And after I got bored of that, I started something new 2 years ago, and it's a new company called Mind Be Well. We measure personal well-being against our priorities. And I'm an entrepreneur from heart. And since I live in Colorado 18 years ago, volunteering became part of my life. Whether that's a good or bad thing, I don't know, but I volunteered at various opportunities. And since I moved to Superior now, I thought, well, I volunteer a little bit here as well.
Very good, thank you. We'll do a few questions from board members. Sandy?
Well, I'll be happy to start. I know you came and joined us for the OSAC meeting last week. Any impressions, and are you still willing to do it based on what you learned that night? I hope you
wouldn't
are.
be, I guess. Well, I didn't know what to expect, so to speak, but I have been at other committees and meetings at other occasions. I mean, not in Superior, but in other parts of the country. It's work, and so I'm willing to put a few hours in per month to do that. And I always have been interested in open space because I'm an avid hiker and biker and all those kind of things. So that's the reason I want to do it.
Okay, great.
Appreciate your application. What would you hope to accomplish on the Open Space Committee?
I think for me, open space as a citizen, most important is that open space is available to the citizens. Having been in Boulder 15 years, there have been lots of discussions about making open space not available for citizens, which I think is a mistake. So to answer your question, I want to put my word in that whatever open space is available in the town of Superior is available to all citizens.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? All right, I'll finish up with the final question that I ask all of our applicants for committees and commissions, and that is, do you have any potentials for conflict of interest? Like you might have a side business doing consulting or something that would somehow benefit from your membership on the committee?
No, I don't.
Okay, very good. Thank you again for your interest, and we'll definitely be in touch soon. So thank you. All right, next.
Next is Stefan.
Steven, sorry. That's all right. Pretty common. That's how I know how to not answer the phone.
Stephen, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just if you want to start with a brief introduction of yourself, that'd be great.
Sure. Steve Sane, live at 1875 Kyoto. Lived in Colorado for the past 18 years, about 8 or so here in Superior. I guess I call myself a data scientist nowadays. I've been working in climate change research for the last 20-ish, almost 20 years. Work in the private sector now. Also sort of in a climate weather risk sort of area now. And this is just a good comment at the right time for me in terms of interest in sort of this kind of work, and the fact that I've got a kid at CU and another, my daughter's finishing up in Monarch, and so I'm soon hopefully to have a little extra time on my hands, and I can't think of a better way to fill some of that up.
Great. Thank you. Laura, go ahead.
Well, first, just want to say thank you so much for applying. Your resume was very impressive and very well suited to this position.
Great.
I wanted to ask, have you had a chance to attend any of the ACES meetings or watch any of the videos online?
I was at the meeting the other night.
Oh, great.
Yeah, it sounds like a great, a great slate of work coming up this year, and a lot of very interesting things that they're going to try to accomplish.
Excellent, thanks.
Steve, appreciate you being at the meeting last week. After seeing the work plan, is there anything else you would have liked to see on that, or anything you'd like to accomplish as a member?
Well, I think one of the things that's kind of interesting for me, kind of having worked on say, climate change at a very high level, I think it's really important to get involved at the grassroots level. Whatever we can do as individuals and how our households and our communities, I think, is a great place to start. To me, it was a learning experience just to see the breadth of things that they were trying to do, and as I said, I'm happy to jump in and get involved.
Great. Anyone else have any questions? Okay. Again, thank you. And final question is about conflict of interest. Anything that might be a potential conflict of interest? Okay. Very good. Thank you, and we'll be in touch soon. All right. That concludes our advisory committee interviews. Appreciate everyone's interest in being on those committees. Thank you. We'll move on to the consent agenda. We have item 4. We have A through J. We've pulled G. So I want to have a motion to approve everything except for G on the
So moved.
consent. Okay. Motion by Trustee Lish, second by Trustee Skrzynski, and we'll need a roll call vote on the consent.
Folsom,
Yes.
Hammerly,
Yes.
Leistus,
Yes.
Lish,
Yes.
Shaw,
Yes.
Skwazinski.
Yes.
All right. Item 4G is adoption of a resolution approving an agreement with Vargas Property Services Incorporated for landscape, flower, and snow removal services. Neil.
Thanks, Mayor Folsom. So I asked to have this pulled because I wanted to get under some of the details in terms of the numbers. And, the information that you sent to me, Matt, on Saturday, I've gone ahead and sent it to the board. One of the main areas I do want to talk about is there's a line item for, I'm going to butcher this, but it's glufosinate, I don't know. The ammonia option instead of Roundup, it's 124,000 of the total. And when we had a board discussion this past summer, we talked about, eliminating Roundup. And my impression at the time was that it was going to be more hand pulling of weeds, but I just want to understand if we're replacing one chemical with another, or if there's more to it than what's in the memo.
So I'll ask Matt Rarick, who's our field superintendent for Parks and Recreation, to come up with, along with Leslie Clark, who's our Parks Director. And I think we have a representative from Vargas here too, is that correct? I think between the three of them.
Perfect. Thanks.
Matt Rarick, town staff.
Leslie Clark, Parks, Recreation, Open Space Director.
Elena Neal, Vargas representative.
And to answer the question regarding replacing one chemical for another and how that interacts with the mechanical pulling, I'm going to go ahead and let our representative from Vargas explain kind of the differences in the approach and our priorities there.
So it was my understanding that this is a replacement chemical for the glyphosate. So the glufosinate is a replacement chemical for the glyphosate. So as far as the hand pulling of weeds, I don't think that that was necessarily kind of a one-for-one replacement. I definitely think that we've been doing the hand pulling of weeds at this point, and we're definitely going to continue to make that a priority, but this was still going to be a supplement to that hand pulling.
Okay.
So if I could, and maybe I'm not necessarily reading the response that was provided to Neil correctly, so correct me if I'm wrong, but in the response from town staff as to itemizing out all the pluses and minuses related to the increase in the budget this year, as Neil pointed out, it was listed as almost $124,000 for the substitute. Now that, am I understanding correctly, that's on top of what we used to pay? So this is an increase in that, the cost of that chemical. So we're now spending $124,000 more than what we spent last year on this replacement chemical. So the replacement chemical unit cost is just that much higher?
Yes.
I think also, if I can jump in, that we have to use more of it as well.
Okay.
For it to be effective. So not only is there a cost, but there's a volume increase as well. And I think it's important to point out that we're not using this in the grass areas. I think it's just the rock bed areas that typically people aren't in to begin with.
And it's just as a spot spray is what we had agreed to in July.
Yep.
So I know in July we said that, well, Director Hammer at the time said it was 3 times more expensive, but I think we didn't have the breakdown of exactly what those numbers were.
Yeah. And not that I'm going back on the decision we made, but I'm not sure it was fully understood how large of an increase it was, but appreciate the information.
And we have a test pilot program later this evening that might be helpful to
That's a good point.
Okay, any other?
No, actually, I do want to just say that, I mean, overall, I've been very impressed with Vargas and all the work that Vargas has done for the community the last 4 or 5 years. You know, the entire crew, and I see the same guys in the same places, they're just incredibly friendly. If I'm walking by with the dog or whatever, they've done a fantastic job of, you know, just kind of pulling off to the side or whatever. So they do a fantastic job with the community. Thank you.
I'll echo that. I think Vargas is doing a fantastic job, and the community looks beautiful, and it's in large part thanks to the work that Vargas is doing. In terms of the incremental additional cost for a glyphosate alternative, I mean, I think that that's one of those things that I was expecting it to be more expensive to do a non-glyphosate application, and I'm happy that the board elected to go in that direction. It is a known carcinogen. It's one of those things that I think forward-thinking communities are already phasing out. Communities are going to start getting behind, you know, leaders like what Superior is right now. So I think, you know, 10 years from now, I think the use of Roundup is going to be more the exception rather than the norm. So I think that this is just something that we're going to need to build into the budget as an additional cost. And, you know, we also talked about, you know, if there was the possibility for going, you know, with an organic treatment, and that was going to be even, you know, significantly more expensive. So I think this is an iterative process where we're going to learn as we go. But I think the first step being to eliminate glyphosate was the proper approach. And then let's see how things look this year. And then we can revisit this next year to see if there's something that we need to change going forward.
I had one other question, Matt, around the addition of 1500 Colton Road.
Uh-huh.
What is being included in that as far as landscaping goes?
Well, we have the property on the west side goes up the hill quite a ways. And then we have all the landscaping in the front and some around the building, but not a lot.
Okay.
So it's just the perimeter parking lot really that has landscaping in it.
Got
And then
it.
we have snow removal that's needed for the building. Yeah.
Makes sense. Thanks.
And we will track the costs, to Trustee Lish's point, for the year. So when we develop the 21 budget, we'll have that information for you, and you can make a decision based off of that information for the 2021 budget.
Yeah. And just to echo a comment that I made last year, and I know that we're up for contract renewal next year, I believe. But I'd like, as we move forward, to hear from both Vargas and staff at our next meeting a year from now, what improvements we can make that will reduce our resources, both human resources, time and energy, as well as our other resources without losing our town aesthetic. So if there's areas for improvement, I'd like us to see that and start moving in that direction.
Okay, anyone have anything else? I'll echo some of the comments that have been made. Appreciate all the hard work that Vargas does and the good coordination with staff. I think we've got a beautiful town, and your company's a great part of helping keep it that way, so appreciate that. All right, with that, I'll entertain a motion to approve 4G.
So moved.
Okay, motion by Trustee Shaw, second by Trustee Swedzinski, and roll call vote.
I'm sorry. Lish,
Yes.
Ryan, oh, sorry, Shaw,
Yes.
Skwazinski,
Yes.
Places,
Yes.
Hammerly,
Yes.
Folsom,
Yes.
and there was a resolution number with that. Could you?
It's R3.
R3. Okay, that's good enough for me.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, very good. We're on to item number 5 now. It's presentation and discussion of original town undergrounding.
Thank you, Mayor. During the 2020 budget review process, the board had directed staff to assemble information for the board to discuss options to transition the current electric utility service lines in original town that are overhead to an all underground service. Staff's been working with Xcel Energy to develop cost estimates and projections using the 1% underground fund through Xcel to offset the costs and assemble and put together the presentation that was in your packet. The 1% underground fund through Xcel Energy is a statewide fund established through franchise agreements for the purpose of burying overhead electrical lines in municipalities. The 1% fund is available to residential electric service fees collected through Xcel Energy and coordinates with cities to complete this work. Craig Eicher is here tonight, and I think I saw Barbara is here as well to answer questions. We also have a presentation if you'd like us to go through that for just the public's. So Martin, you want to bring that up?
And while Martin's doing that, I just wanted to introduce, this is Ellie Slayton from my office. She worked on the confidential memo that you received and also on the presentation that we're about to give, and we'll be happy to answer any legal questions that you have.
Thank you. Well,
Thanks, Martin. Go ahead and go to the next slide if you would. So the 1% fund, undergrounding fund through Xcel Energy, is a revenue that Xcel Energy collects from residential customers in municipalities to bury these overhead lines at the municipality's request. The underground fund also allows us to borrow ahead 3 years based on future allocations to fund current projects. Our 1% fund currently has a balance of just under $800,000 with a borrow ahead amount of just over $200,000, making available for any project that we have in town of $1 million plus. Most of the electrical lines in town have already been buried as they were developed, such as Rock Creek and other newer developments. Those electrical lines were buried as part of the development. When original town was built, the technology wasn't there to bury the lines, so they were installed overhead. And you see that in many of the older cities where the lines are overhead. We've been working with Xcel to determine what the cost would be to underground the lines in original town. This is both north of Coal Creek and south of Coal Creek. Most of these lines run through the alleyways. The estimate that we've come up with Xcel Energy is $1.58 million in 2019 dollars. We've also, next slide, Martin, please.
Just a question before you
Yeah.
leave that slide. So just an aggregate question, the 1% fund, at some point, all of Superior is going to be underground in terms of power lines, not the town. What happens to the tax at that point?
That is an excellent question for Craig, maybe.
Thanks for the question. I had the same.
Thank you, Matt. Good evening, trustees, mayor. I'm Craig Eicher. I'm the area manager for Xcel Energy in the Boulder County region. So you ask an excellent question, and it's hard sometimes for us to explain this process. The 1% fund, or the underground fund that we created back in 1969 and then rolled out to all of our communities who have franchises for us, is not really a pot of money sitting there with Superior's name on it. It is a commitment in our O&M budget on behalf of your community that is accrued at a rate of 1% of electric revenues within your town. So if at some point in the future you decide that you want to do this project or certain portions of it, as long as there's enough money in there, we'll cover the entire cost. If there, of course, was a greater demand for undergrounding in the town than the budget or the accrued amount, then someone else would have to pick up that cost. But this is a benefit of our franchise with you that we feel helps us improve our system, but also improve the aesthetics of your neighborhoods. So at the point in time when all of the power lines have been undergrounded in Superior, we don't know. It hasn't happened in too many communities yet. In fact, most of our communities still have certain portions of them that still need to be undergrounded. But we're working on kind of figuring that out and deciding far into the future what we might be able to offer in place of the 1% fund for underground only. Right now, it's only for undergrounding Xcel Energy distribution lines. I hope that answers your question.
How about a community solar array?
Well, we can think about that. Sure.
So Craig, are there any communities that are already totally underground and where this fee would not apply to those customers in that area?
No. So this is, the answer to your first question is yes. There are one or two other communities that have come very close to undergrounding all their power lines. Again, this is not a line item on our customers' bills. It is coming from our general rates for all customers. So all customers pay into it. The towns who have provided us franchise agreements are the ones who benefit from it, if you can see what I'm saying here. So people in unincorporated Boulder County, for example, don't have a 1% fund that they're able to use in their neighborhoods. Thanks.
Craig, one more question.
Yeah.
If the town, I don't know if you've had a chance to go through the options that are listed and will be presented momentarily, but if the town were to, say this upcoming year, pay for all undergrounding and therefore take on some of the expense ourselves, would those additional expenses that go beyond that 1% fund be eligible for reimbursement as that 1% fund would have accrued?
That's a good question as well, and I know Matt and Martin have asked me that question. What we're doing here is allowing a borrow ahead of 3 years to contain the total liability on our finances. So you can imagine we have about 165 communities around the state of Colorado who grant us franchises. That could be a rather sizable liability if we were able to allow them to borrow indefinitely into the future. So what we try to do is to allow this benefit to our communities, but not just what's on the books, but what could potentially be borrowed over the next 3 years. But that's as far as we can go.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
So this slide is tough to see and read, but it basically shows the work that's gone into the plans for Original Town and for the undergrounding project that would be needed. The next two slides there. There's also a cost. So this is just for the main lines through the alleyways. There's also a cost to take the overhead lines that go to the home as well, and those would need to be undergrounded. And maybe some panel upgrades on the home, depending on the panel at the that's currently there. Those would be the costs of any homeowner or or property owner of that unit, and not to the town. We estimate that the cost would be anywhere from $5,400 to bore or $2,800 to trench a 100-foot service line from the main line that would be buried to the home. And then if they needed an upgrade to their junction box, anywhere from $1,000 to $4,000, which the homeowner would contract separately. Now, they would not be required to make these upgrades. The town could go ahead and underground the main lines, and an overhead line could still exist to the homeowner's residence if they wanted, and then at some point in the future decide to bury that line to their home. So the cost for the 100 homes that are in original town, an average cost of $7,500, would be a total cost of about $750,000 to do each of the homes, that private service from the main line to the home.
Matt, just a question
Yeah.
for you or Martin. On the previous slide, when you mentioned the trenching or the boring, is that work done by a third party or is that specifically Excel? I get the electrical panels a third party.
Private,
Okay.
third party.
Okay.
electric.
So Excel will just do the overhead lines to the trunk, and then effectively the homeowner's got a responsibility to find a third party. Or, oh,
We would actually.
If you can come
Come
up
on
to.
up, Barbara.
I'm Barbara Temple with Excel Energy, and I work in the engineering department. Excel would actually install the wire from the pole or the pedestal, whatever's installed, to the metering panel. So the customer could trench on their own property, or they would contract with us to do the trenching, or we would do an estimate for them to do that part of the job.
so you go to, I guess, say the edge of the property line, and then the homeowner's got the responsibility of going from wherever you ended it to their panel.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Staff working with Excel has come up with 4 options for the board to consider. The first option is to underground all the overhead lines in original town at once, and provide service lines and junction boxes for all the homes. Cost to underground the lines, $1.5 million, service lines, $750,000. With available current undergrounding 1% funds of $1 million would be a total cost to the town of $1.3 million.
Matt, does that include the borrow ahead?
Yes.
Okay, so that's as much money as available.
Yep.
And so on option 1, if we elected to go this route and people for whatever reason said, you know what, I don't want this done, even if you're paying for it, I don't want it done. I like my overhead wire, I don't want my garden messed up, whatever. What happens then?
Well, there's certainly a way to get it done. I hope that wouldn't happen, and I'll talk, maybe Craig can jump in on this too. Excel has the right to do it, probably, so under their tariff, they could do it. I don't know that we would want to, we would have to have that discussion. I don't know how else to say it, but it can be done.
Okay.
With or without the homeowner's consent.
I mean, I see option 1 as the least controversial in that there is not a cost. I mean, cost to residents is
Right.
going to be the biggest obstacle to this. I think everyone can mostly agree that overhead lines going underground are a good thing, at least in the alleys, but when you start going across people's property.
Right.
Anyhow.
Yeah, that's, so Kendra says, what she says is correct. We have the right within our property rights, our easements, and within the city property as well, to maintain our power lines, and that could include converting them to underground. When it comes to that portion that runs to the house, then that's where we run into who makes the call on requiring it, forcing it by city code or what otherwise. And Barb, you can, what was I going to say? That's where you have to, figure out, do we want to force that on them? Oh, so the option would be then to leave the pole in place while the main distribution line is underground. Now, how does that work?
So basically, basically, we would underground the main line. We would have to set transformers and pedestals along the corridor that we're undergrounding, and then we would have to go back up the pole with the wire and then leave the service overhead. And in the option for the original town, we had to actually add a couple poles. I don't know exactly the number. I'd have to look at my design again because maybe there wasn't a pole where the existing service line is now. So we would have to add a pole to keep their line overhead if they didn't want to underground. So the wires would be undergrounded, but then you'd have poles with overhead services going off of them to the homes.
I think, Barbara, you had sent a picture or two to Matt back in October when we asked this question.
Right.
And I think that was some pictures from Louisville, which helped, to, at least for me, explain kind of what would happen. So, but Clint, along your lines, or the questions, so if we wanted to, if the town wanted to absorb the costs, I think the risk, and I don't want to get into solution planning right now, is, in terms of electrical panels and the upgrade of the potential code improvements that may have to happen inside the home, and the ripple effects. If you upgrade the panel, you might have to upgrade, because some of the homes in original town are a little older. We got to be really careful in upgrading the panel and repercussions to the overall service levels within the home.
Well, and that's why you're talking 5,000 to 7,000. For those that don't know, I have purchased an original town home and actually went through this exercise. I had it undergrounded as part of the remodel, and that service panel did need to be upgraded. So it's a good thing for homes to have that done. I mean, there's probably more safety risk to a bad electrical system in the home than there is to the wires outside of the home. So I think this will be a net improvement to all of original town if those homes can be upgraded. So it's really about moving the disconnect and the breakers outside, which is current code, versus inside where most of them are right now.
Just one more thing. I've only done 2 options, 2 phases. So if for some reason you wanted to break up the north part of the creek, we wouldn't have to underground that whole thing at one time. We'd have to figure out what the best sections would be, but we could separate that into maybe more than one phase to underground that part as well.
Okay, thanks. Matt, you want to go ahead?
Okay.
Go through the options.
Option 2 would be for the town to cover the cost of the service line and the homeowners to cover the cost of junction boxes. This reduces the total cost to the town slightly, but it's still a significant number of $1 million based on the service lines that would need to be covered by the town for the home. Option 3 is for the town to cover the funds, the undergrounding of the mains, and the homeowners would cover the cost for funding the service lines and the junction boxes. This is assuming the project's done in 1 year, all 3 of these options. And so the exposure to the town for the cost is $560,000 to underground all the main lines north of the creek and south of the creek. And then the service lines would be the individual homeowner's responsibility or property owners. And the 4th option is a 2-phased approach to underground the main lines in original town, with the lines north of the creek to be undergrounded in 2020, and the lines south of Coal Creek. And this has been updated based on Trustee Shaw's question in 2026 south of the creek. And then the homeowners would still be responsible for funding the service lines and junction boxes upgrades for their individual properties. This has the least exposure to the town as far as an additional cost, with slight additional costs needed by the town of $62,000 and then $3,000 in 2026. And then the town attorney's firm provided a memo to the board on a possible local improvement district to help with funding costs for service line and junction boxes to the home. And you guys want to just give a brief overview on that?
Sure.
That'd be great.
Okay, so Kendra already introduced me, but I'm Allie Slayton. I'm one of the associates down at her firm. So if you guys do decide to move forward on a policy ground, I'll be the one that'll be shepherding this through the process, making sure all the resolutions and ordinances are in place, reviewing some of the cost agreements with Excel. So I'll be your point of contact for that with Kendra's guidance. So what would that process look like? So in the memo that I provided to you, it would be the creation of a LID, a local improvement district. It's a pretty lengthy memo. I apologize for that, but I did want to make sure that any of the questions you guys had would be answered in there. Anything that's not, please come to one of us with those, and we can definitely answer those, tonight or otherwise. But what is that process? So if the town does want to move forward with the undergrounding, the proper way is through the LID. The way the town gets repaid through this is through special assessments, which are a lot like property taxes that will be imposed on the properties that are benefited from the undergrounding in original town. The town has a lot of leeway here to set the repayment periods, to set interest. The main takeaway really is that the town can recover nearly every cost associated with the LID. Just to give you an idea, and this is in the memo, it's improvements, construction cost, engineering, clerical, advertising, cost of inspection, cost of collection, interest that you want to impose on that. It's essentially a loan to the property owners, as well as legal costs for establishing the LID. So all of those are recoverable as part of the special assessment on the property owners. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So I don't want to get too far into the weeds because I know you are still kind of on the policy grounds for this right now. But the creation of the LID, first, there would be no vote by the citizens. You can initiate that on your own. There is a way for them to stop that process, and I'll touch on that in a minute. But the first thing we would need you guys to do is pass a resolution, which really gets the rest of the process started. So until you have those studies from Excel telling you how much these costs are going to be, and it sounds like we do have one of those, 1.58 million right now. It can be really hard for you to understand and for the citizens to understand exactly what the assessment's going to be on their property. And of course, they're going to be very concerned about that. So no vote by the citizens, but there is a way for them to stop that. To get started, we need a resolution. Within 120 days of you passing that resolution, Excel would then provide you with a study that tells you what those costs actually would be to create this LID and what those special assessments would need to be on the property. As far as the actual assessment goes on the property, those are going to be calculated individually based on the benefit that each property receives from the process. Two big items that I just want you to be aware of, because I know these can be lengthy. There would be 2 hearings involved with this. So the first hearing, and this is all in the memo, the first hearing is for the creation of the LID itself. During this hearing, petitioners would be able to come forward, and this is where they could stop the process. If a majority of the property owners, a majority of the property assessed, so it has to be both of those things, come forward with a petition, the LID could be stopped in its tracks. So you could theoretically come back at the next meeting and start the process over again, but you would have to do that. There's no time limit. There's not 3 years from that petition or whatever. It's just you have to stop it then and there. But at that hearing, if you are successful and you do decide to move forward on the studies that Excel provides with those numbers, you establish the LID at that meeting and with those costs that they lock in. So at the second hearing, prior to this, you're going to release an assessment roll, which actually lists all the properties that are going to be included in the LID. So citizens will know if their property is going to be part of that assessment or whether they'll be excluded. Prior to that hearing, they're also going to know exactly the number that's going to be imposed on their property, so exactly how much they're expected to pay. This is the hearing that would probably be a little more contentious, just because every property owner does have to be heard if they do want to appear. At that hearing, you could decide to lower the assessment. You could raise the assessment as well. But at the end of that hearing, every owner will know exactly how much they'll be responsible for. So there's a lot of transparency in this process. There's really no guesswork for citizens once you get that far. After that, the assessment's imposed. They'll have 30 days to pay. If they do pay within that 30 days, they'll be eligible for a 5% discount. Otherwise, you guys get to set the terms as far as repayment goes. So the statute says up to 20 years, you could impose less. You get to decide on the interest rate. You get to decide whether the cost you want to roll into that assessment. But like I said, a lot of it is up to you. Of course, listening to the citizens to what, they want. But that is, your responsibility. After it's established, they'll begin paying within those 30 days, like I said, up to 20 years. And that's the creation of the lid. So does anyone have any questions for that?
If we did option one, which is pay for everything, we don't need a lid. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, this would be if you wanted to charge any portion of it, and you can pick a portion, so it doesn't have to be all the costs. It could be some of the costs. It could be none of the costs. But you're right. If you pick that option, there's no necessity.
We can do any of the options 1 through 4. The lid's purpose is only to the extent that the town is seeking to recover some of the costs associated with this project,
which is
specifically by the residents that are going to be quote unquote benefiting from the improvements, right?
Correct. And this process was set up for exactly this reason, so that towns could recover costs for these undergrounding projects.
Alternatively, we could do any of the options without a lid, right?
Correct.
The lid doesn't actually give us the power or ability to go in and trench through people's property or anything like that. It's just the recovery of the cost.
It's really just a financing mechanism.
Right. And we can still pay for whatever we chose to pay for out of the general fund, just through the ordinary budgeting process that we wanted to go through.
Yep.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. All right. Was there more? Were there more slides?
That was the last slide.
That's it? Okay.
Yep.
All right. Thoughts, questions?
Yes, I mean, as far as the options go, I kind of, in my head, I broke it down into 2 different decisions we need to make. One, do we want to underground, and if so, what timeline do we want to do it on? And then the second would be, would we cover, would there be appetite to subsidize the cost for the original town residents getting into their homes, or do we not? So I wonder if rather than go option by option, if we could talk about those 2 questions.
Sure. I'll speak to them and just say that I think that undergrounding is a good thing, and it's probably a good thing sooner than later. And for me, option 1 is the only one I would want to consider, because I think the...
Mayor, can I just clarify?
Okay.
Because I heard you say 2 different things, I thought. Option 1 is, just to be clear, option 1 is the town covers the cost for the main lines and the cost for the service line. Yeah, everything. Okay.
Yes. And it may be shocking that I'm in favor of that, but I am. And here's why. I think to Laura's point, we do need to make a policy decision. Do we even want to go down this road at all? I mean, the power's on, it's working, and if we don't want to go down this road and spend 1.3 million, then let's don't do it. But I think given the amounts of money we spend on other things in this town, and it's not a big shocking number to me, and it's 750,000 difference of, that the town kind of covers it all. So I really have no interest in going through the lid process. It sounds interesting, and I'm sure it's a creative way to recover some costs, but the good news is we've got money in the budget that if we choose, or we've got money available that if we choose to do this at all, then I think we should do it all and pay for it all and just get it done at once. So, or just choose not to do it. So that's where I am.
Do we have an idea as to how many homes in original town have already, like the home that you purchased, had the lines and service box upgrades improved?
I don't, we had the estimate of what the homes that needed, and our estimate was 100 homes, but I don't have that information as far as how many have already won.
Right, but I mean, so the point is, if we had a resident a year or so ago, 5 years ago, who went through and actually, paid for this out of pocket, and then all of a sudden the town is coming in and offering to do this, is there going to be any opportunity for that homeowner to, get reimbursed for the funds that they've already spent?
Oh, like me?
Right.
And I've got a better question. Where does that stop then? Because frankly, this is a more or less a home improvement on personal property that we're talking about using taxpayer funds for.
And no, I mean, it's a good question, but I would not be interested in pursuing that because that was a decision I made and any other homeowner made at that time. And I think this is just moving forward. It's some homes are going to need service improvements. Others were built with exterior panels and it'll be a much more straightforward hookup. And I think I think the simplest and fairest way to do this is just upgrade them, but going back in time, I'm not interested, even though it might benefit me. I'm not interested in going down that path. Now,
Can you clarify what you mean by going back in time?
well, going back in time to potentially reimburse someone who's already undergrounded.
I see.
Who does not need to who does not need town funds to improve their property. Now, another question is, so Excel lines are not the only thing running from alley to home. You've got, some people have Comcast or Xfinity cable. Some people have got telephone wires, and all of that needs to be included in this. And we, during this process that I went through, we put in a couple of sleeves, pipes in the ground, and those were run through there. So that's, but ours was kind of a unique situation because we hooked it up. It was kind of a new hookup, but where someone has existing service that needs to be kind of taken down and put through pipes, does this cost include the costs that Xfinity, CenturyLink, whoever is going to, they're not going to come out there for free and do all this hooking up. and there could be some box work that has to be done on homes for this process. So maybe you could come up and talk to Excel representative could come up and speak to how these other utility vendors are handled in this process and costs.
So you're absolutely right, Mayor. That's a very good point. The other utilities would presumably charge to convert their facilities to underground as well. Our estimate that we're providing does not include any of that. It's only for our power lines. And on top of that, something that we haven't mentioned tonight yet is the fact that we would require an easement on the property to place the power line underground so that we would have the right to be there. And so the individual property owner would have to agree to let that happen.
And it could be a transformer or pedestal. It isn't just necessarily the wire. So depending upon how it lays out, somebody may have a transformer in their yard and somebody may have a pedestal. And then I was going to say something else about communications. Oh, if we open trench, they can joint trench with us. So that would cut down on the cost on their side because we would be providing the trench, but you may still have to pay for the wire or whatever boxes they would need to install to underground their facilities.
Okay. Yeah, just for the benefit of those listening, that a pedestal is equivalent to a trash can, a smaller trash can. A transformer is, most people are probably familiar with those green metal boxes that you see out and about. Those are transformers, so those are bigger. So yeah, the point is those have got to, I mean, our property has a pedestal on it.
Right.
And not that big of a deal. It's about the footprint of a pole, but the transformers are going to have to go somewhere, and that's something people will have to consider.
Correct.
And under our franchise agreement with Comcast, we may be able to save some of those costs because if it's a public project for undergrounding, they're often required to comply. So I'd have to take a look at that.
Yeah, I think the costs of these other utilities is definitely something we want to look at because it's one of those things we don't want to get hit with some surprise line item that like, oh, who's paying for that? But the good news is, like you said, it can go, the wires can go in the same trench, so there's not like double the trenching costs and things like that. And
So Craig, with respect to the easement that you said that Excel is going to require, is that for purposes of running the trench across the property, for locating the pedestal and/or the transformer on the property, both?
Correct.
Correct. And have you encountered situations where homeowners refused and then you had to, duke it out with them, take them to court, do something a little more aggressive to actually get the transformer replaced? Because if somebody wanted to place the transformer on my property, I'd much rather it be on Clint's.
And I would too. So yeah, we do. I mean, on occasion, we do have to try to work with so some of the continuing concerns or issues associated with having the box on your property is allowing us access to it, right? So your neighbor presumably could have a fence with a locked gate when you couldn't, or we would have to be able to get onto your property at a certain time when we needed to work on that box, or climb the pole that's in your backyard currently. So it's always fraught with negotiations, and most people we find are reasonable because they want to have electric service to their house, and they certainly do think that taking the poles and wires down from behind their properties increases the value of their environment. So most people are fairly reasonable with this, but no, we have to sometimes handle this on a case-by-case basis as we go down through the neighborhood.
And will Excel pay the homeowners for the easement?
I don't remember if we do on these.
There are instances where we have paid for easement, but that's not a best practice that we don't start with that.
And then
so I'm going to interrupt. It's a little different than, see, in this case, we have an existing power line, right, running down through this corridor, and we hopefully have property rights that are in place and well delineated in an easement. So all we're doing is, in the case of the distribution line, we're just dropping it down within that property right. And so in most cases, we don't find we have to pay people. Now, if we were going to bring a whole new facility through a property, yeah, that's a different thing.
Well,
am I wrong? Tell me I'm wrong. She's the engineer.
The only
Just ask her
difference with
questions.
that is our power lines are in the alley right of way, so
which is
our
property of the
poles,
town.
right?
Yep.
So we're not actually on their property, and we could put the wire in the alley, but the actual pedestal and transformers would need to be on the property
and the trench
mm-hmm.
through their property. So then we would, and I was kind of thinking logistically, we would need to actually have a closing with each and every property owner in Original Town to effectuate this easement?
If there's an easement already there, no. We'd probably have to look at that.
For each box, though, you would.
Yeah, for a box, yeah, it depends.
And we have a right-of-way agent who handles that and is pretty assertive and really good at his job, and it wouldn't take that long.
So most of the undergroundings that have happened since I've been on the board have been, along McCaslin, have been on 88th, in areas that didn't have, existing homeowners that we had to deal with. We had either a single private property owner or we had land that was owned by the town. What problems has Excel encountered that we haven't yet kind of heard about tonight, or that we should be thinking about when we're dealing with, an existing, established neighborhood like Original Town Superior?
Well, I mean, I think Mayor Folsom brought one up, and that is the disturbance to the people's property. You have to try your best to avoid that, and I think there's some leeway in our case, Barbara, where you can locate the box in a way that might not conflict with something that's currently in their backyard. I mean,
absolutely, we would want to get with the property owners, and we try to put it on the property line on one side or the other, not just in the middle of their yard or anything like that. So we do try to keep it where it's not a hindrance in their property or anything, but.
Yeah, and then, I mean, it's always cost. I mean, that's always the first thing that sort of hits people when they see the, what all the associated costs with this conversion, and realizing that it does run all the way to the house, and it has implications for everything on their side of the meter even sometimes, as you said earlier.
For communities that you've done this before, is it more common for communities like Superior to actually pay for, all the costs associated with the trenching of the service line and the installation of the junction boxes? Or is it more common for that to be something that the homeowners themselves should be required to pay? And or do you see lids frequently used for these purposes?
So my experience is only my experience. It's not everybody in the company, but here in Boulder County, most of the cities who have been exercising the 1% fund have done so primarily on arterial roadways. If you'll notice, Boulder and Lafayette, Louisville, most of the main highways have been undergrounded over the course of many years, and very small portions still remain overhead. There's some sections on Baseline we're working on, right, and South Boulder Road. So that's where their concentration has been, not in individual neighborhoods. So Superior is unique in a way because you're smaller, but so much of your neighborhoods were built after the requirements came in our franchises that said all new construction will be built underground to begin with. So now you're just left with this one small area, and so most cities don't have that issue. Now, I have not seen a town come forward, I don't know, you can tell me, I don't think in our area, come forward and pay for it all. In most cases, I've seen the poles remain overhead for those customers who didn't want to convert at the time that the main line was put underground. I'm trying to think of another one, but that's really it. And in most cases, in our case, here in Boulder County, when somebody wants their power lines underground, it's typically only one customer or a few customers in a line, and then that's it. And so they pay for everything all at once. The cities typically like to reserve the 1% fund for those arterial highways. They don't like to put the money into individual neighborhoods. Again, that's what makes Superior a unique place.
I appreciate that. And, for me, if we were to underground the main lines but leave the poles up, to me, we haven't done any. We've kind of had a missed opportunity there. So that's just my view of, especially seeing those pictures that were sent through earlier. Just like, what did you do here? Visually, you did nothing.
So to that end, Craig, if we were to just do the main lines and it turns out that the town decides not to do the service lines, anything else, and the homeowners decide that they don't want to, have we improved anything? Is there any real benefit there?
Well, I think you end up with fewer poles, don't you? Or do you end up with more poles?
Well, south of the creek, if I'm remembering correctly, it was the same number of poles, but north of the creek, we would have to add, I'm going to say 4 to 5 poles at the most.
But so the lines aren't there anymore.
The lines aren't there,
Yeah.
but you do have those poles, and then you have your overhead. So, and we would set it up where in the future everything could be undergrounded. We'd put the pedestals where services could go out of those as they underground, but to your point, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. So if I could ask a question a little bit differently. So one of the reasons why this came up is I think we all agree that overhead lines have an increased safety risk, whether it's snow, rain, trees, whatever. But even if we have a bunch of extra poles, if there's a heavy windstorm, you're going to knock out power to 1 or 2 homes as opposed to the entire neighborhood. Mm-hmm. You've undergrounded the main lines, and what's left are a bunch of thin little lines going from these individual poles. So you may lose a pole, you might lose power to 2 or 3 homes as opposed to the entire 120, 130 homes. Is that a fair assessment?
That's true.
Okay.
The other thing to keep in mind too is if you let the poles stay, once the service lines are off of those, somebody has to pay to remove the pole. So those could be some additional costs in the future.
I think we have that on 88th Street now. The poles are just standing there.
They're getting ready to get removed.
Okay.
We were waiting for Comcast to take down their line.
Which finally happened, so those poles are just there. So that's a fair
Young
point.
just emailed me today, so.
You're right. The reliability of the system increases.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. We end up with the same number or even 2 more poles in the area as far as visual impact.
And that's fine. And just to make sure that we're all on the same page and everyone at home watching understands as well, that 1% fund, if we were to say not spend any of that money in 2020, we don't lose that money. It accrues,
Oh, no.
correct? So that as long as we don't spend that money, we'll continue to accrue and have that availability to do the 3-year borrow ahead.
Correct.
Okay.
Is there anything in our system, in this town of Superior system, beyond this that would need to be undergrounded, or are we done?
This is the last area in town, yep.
Okay. So to the point of, do we spend it all here? I think this is the only place we got to spend it.
Mayor, I was struck by what you said. It surprised me, and then I immediately agreed with you. And maybe I'm being a little bit too personal here, but the fact that you would think that the town should just come up with the money, sort of socialize this cost, right? I think that's what you were saying across the board. It seems to me to be a really good matter of equity, because you have a group of people who live in a neighborhood that doesn't have a lot of the amenities and modern amenities, I should say, as other neighborhoods, just because this neighborhood wasn't built recently. You know, Rock Creek is a great example. They're two different looking places, and they have, I think this is a great way to kind of add equity to this part of the town.
Yes.
And socialize that cost. It would, if I certainly lived here, I would vote for it.
Well, and it's actually been done once before with water and sewer.
Right.
I mean, when original town was built, they were on well and septic. And in the 1980s, that converted to municipal water and municipal sewer. And they had to go into every one of those homes and trench out to the street and put in water lines and sewer lines. And that was probably a bigger deal than this. I mean, bigger trenches and bigger process to get water and sewer into those homes. And I'm sure there was a lot of pain and hand wringing at the time. And I think some residents, I asked the question of staff, I mean, that was a long time ago, you know, how were those costs borne? But I think there was probably some town sharing of those costs at the time. And I think for me, I think it's reasonable now to do the same here.
So I think I have to disagree on that point a little bit. I think certainly we are all a town. We need to make sure that all of our residents have equity in terms of the amenities that they have. But in my opinion, as I'm looking at the different proposals here, we're already investing quite a bit of town resources into undergrounding the main lines. I think that's a huge benefit to original town. I would, though, like to see the individual homeowners take on the responsibility of getting the service to their homes. We know some homeowners have already done that, like yourself, and I don't want to go back and credit either. But I think we can kind of take our time with that portion of it, because as Neil and Sandy pointed out, you know, at least then if there is an incident and power goes out, we're losing power to only the homes that haven't chosen to take that on themselves rather than the whole town.
I'm going to go ahead and agree with Laura here. And philosophically, we are stewards of the entire town's money. All of the resources the taxpayers give to through their taxes, we are interested to make sure there's equity in how that's used. When we're talking about spending funds to more or less provide private property improvements, that's not fair to the rest of the town that isn't getting access to those improvements. It doesn't have access to that, especially if we're spending upwards of $5,000 per property. I mean, that's a significant amount. As a steward of the taxpayer funds, I can't support improving private property. I am happy to use the 1% fund to do the mainline improvements. Rather than even using any of our town funds to do it, outside of that 1%, I think we just extend the timeline a little bit and do it as we have those funds available. I think that makes the most economic sense. And original town, for what it's worth, how long has it been in existence and how long have we had overhead lines there? Another 2, 3, 4, 5 years, gigantic safety risk. It has been this way for quite some time, and at least in the time that I've been here, the power outages that Original Town has experienced, I've experienced as well. It hasn't been a localized original town issue. So I am more in favor of taking the slower path, using that 1% to fund the main lines, and then pursuing feedback from the residents of Original Town to see if a lid is something that they're interested in. And if not, we leave it up to each individual property owner to determine what they'd like to do.
So, as Gladys mentioned, in December, she toured me around Original Town. We drove up and down a number of alleys, and, and this is a point I think Sandy made a long time ago. I mean, there's definitely a safety issue here with respect to the overhead power lines, the very large old growth trees. And as far as I'm concerned, we should have looked at doing this a long time ago. I wish it would have been looked at as part of the 2020 budget. There's a specific road I chose to not support the development of that road because I wanted to free up cash. And this is the sort of reason I want to free cash up for, is for things like this, to bring this forward, to do it as soon as possible. But, Laura, to your earlier point, we can bifurcate the decision at this point. One is the cost of the undergrounding. How does the town bear it, relative to what do we have available to us through Excel? Obviously we don't have enough from Excel to do it all right now. However, the SURA agreement is going to expire in 2022. $500,000 there, or more than $500,000 is available starting in 2022. So I think there's options available to us to front the $1.3 million. A good chunk of it's going to come from Excel. I think self-funding the rest of it, if we even push the whole thing out to 2022, it's all funded, it's all at once, using the SURA funds. We started out now and, we dip it into the general fund. I'm absolutely in support of moving the undergrounding forward as quickly as possible. I don't think there's any reason to wait because, just because there hasn't been a problem in the past, I don't think is enough reason to hold back on it, because I do anticipate there's going to be a problem soon. Now, when it comes to the cost to the homeowner, I think I disagree with Clint here a little bit. I do see the value of pursuing it. My concern is a risk associated with, what's great about Original Town is every home is a little different as opposed to Rock Creek. Rock Creek, it's a known entity. If we have to do something to every home, it's like the exact same thing for each of the tract homes that we have. With Original Town, house A is different from B, different from C. The relative cost is going to change dynamically, and my fear is that when we get to some of the homes, they're going to need a massive upgrade with respect to internal wiring, and where does it end with respect to the town on the upgrade? And absent, a way to mitigate that risk, I'm really hesitant to go down the path of footing the upgrade. But I do want us to get a lot more creative than what we're seeing right here. We have a fantastic chamber. Maybe they can work out deals with electricians and with trenchers and get a big corporate buy so that everybody that signs on gets a big discount. I think there's things that we can do to help the homeowners. One of the things that Gladys did point out, we have a lot of folks in Original Town that are on fixed income. This $4,000 to $8,000 is not an easy number to swallow. So I know, and I think that is something we have to figure out a way to solve. But step one is, do we want to go do the undergrounding, and then how soon? And the answer to me, from me, is now. And then let's solve the individual homeowners piece of it as we go.
So
when you say now, Neil, based on your comments about SURA in 2022, are you considering 2022 to be now as well?
So the reality is, from everything I've heard from Excel, even if we said go now, it ain't going to happen this year. We are not going to get this much work done in 1 year. And you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but given the number of easements that you have to work out and the amount of work we're talking about here, if you can get this done in a year, I think that'd be great.
Well, clarification, what do you mean?
For the pedestal easements, the individual homeowner agreements.
To the house, too?
Yeah, I mean, just even.
Because everything in the right of way, I think we could get done this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the main lines are definitely my concern.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
So
right.
in your opinion, is there a difference then in doing the main lines this year versus 2022?
No, I think do it all now. I mean, let's just, this is a Band-Aid that needs to be pulled off.
Yep.
We can pull it off slowly between now and 2026, or we can just do it now and dip it into the general fund.
Well, and just to clarify, the funding sources are important here. So
Yes.
what you're proposing is using SURA funds or general fund or whatever. Whereas if we were to do it slowly, so we're actually using resources that we could divert for other purposes. If we're doing it more slowly and we just use this 1% fund, that fund can't be used for anything else. And if we use town funds, that can't get reimbursed. So we're foregoing the additional, I'll call it revenue, it's not really revenue, but reimbursements that we would get otherwise from Excel if we do it quickly.
No, agreed. And I think that is obviously something that Excel's got to work out, because if we do this all through the fund, by 2029, that fund is done. And there's not an answer in terms of what happens to 2030. You know, as Mark alluded to, can we use those funds towards something different? And the answer is probably not.
Right.
So you're right.
Yeah.
You know, it's either we do it now and the town
And we leave money on the table.
diverts funds away for, you know, about $500,000. Alternative is this gets stretched out to 2026. And, you know, if you look at the history of what we've done in town, we've accelerated a lot of other things because there's a benefit to it, you know, for the aggregate. And I think the $500,000 we're talking about here, there's a pretty big benefit to doing it sooner in my mind. I mean, at the risk of, you know, not doing something else over the next 5 years.
Well, and maybe we're parsing details. I think the difference that I see there is that it was either money that we were going to spend anyway, and we just moved it forward, or we were able to borrow it from a different fund, such as Wildflower, we borrowed from the Open Space Fund.
True.
In this circumstance, we're using town funds or SURA funds rather than just tapping into what Excel's providing.
That's a fair point.
So about how much money do we get a year?
I think revenue is 72,000 a year. Or, I mean, we don't get it.
The 1% is about 72,000 a
Increase is
year.
about 72,000 a year.
But we move forward with doing the main undergrounding and continue to work with the residents. I mean, could we do the main part of it and spend our money to do the main part of it, and then work with the original town residents to really get a determination how many are even interested in connecting? Because at this point, I know one person who would like to see us connect, because that one person has told me that. So we don't really even at this point know the magnitude. I still believe there is a safety factor here to getting down the main lines, because if one of those main lines goes down, we could have half of original town lose its power. So I would really like to see us do that, but continue to work in communicating with the residents of original town and how many of them are actually interested in having this done. Because as we communicate with them, we may hear that they are supportive of the concept of the lit. I mean, if we spread the expense going to their homes, because I agree with Laura. I'm not sure that it is the responsibility of the rest of the town to pay for that connection. I had to pay for it when I bought my house. But if we could communicate with the residents, and it's going to be time consuming because there's 100 homes down there, and find out what is their interest in connecting, try and figure out what the expenses are to each homeowner, which we're obviously going to have to know. But we don't have to do that immediately. And so I would really be supportive of us going ahead, using the 1% plus the 3% or 3-year advance, take some money out of our budget to do this, because this is an important service to protect the residents of original town and our town in general from a major power outage. We could still have lines go down to the homes, but at least we've taken responsibility for not having a major event where a big tree comes down on a major power line. So, you know, I really do believe this is a safety factor. I've been in towns where the power's been down for months or for weeks at a time because of major storms. You know, it's never happened here. Doesn't mean it won't happen. We never had a flood until we had the flood a few years ago. So, but I definitely agree with Laura. I have a concern about us paying the expense, even though I think that would be the easy way to solve the problem and make sure it got done. I'm just not sure that's fair to the rest of our residents.
Yeah, to me, there's just a huge advantage if even a couple homes have opted to get the lines run to their house. That's the beacon in case of a storm or an emergency, that, you know, we can all help our neighbors out if you happen to have a house that has power. The question that I have is kind of to Ken's point. I'm still a little up in the air as to whether we spend the incremental $500,000 to do it all at once versus, you know, half and half. I came into this kind of thinking I was inclined to do it all at once, get it done, less disruption to the residents certainly, and more incentive for residents themselves to upgrade the service lines and junction boxes sooner versus, you know, the half of town that doesn't get it done, they're not going to upgrade their lines then for 6 years either. But I'm curious what the rest of the board thinks about that $500,000 price tag on it.
Well, as part of that process, could we, before we make that determination, because there is some sense in the 2020, 2026 thing to really talk with the homeowners in those two parts of town and find out where is there more support for this to happen? Because maybe there is one part of town, I mean, obviously one part's bigger than the other, but, you know, maybe if one part of town's more supportive than the other, we do that area first and do the other. But the 6-year gap gives me a little bit of a concern. Why should, you know, south of Coal Creek have to wait? Although, you know, they've waited for 100 years, so, you know, but I do have some concern about how we determine who we do first.
And that was the reason why, you know, I bombarded Matt with a question today because, you know, the original slide said 2025 and you do the math, it's actually 2026. I don't want to have to be in here 2 years from now saying, hey, sorry, south of Coal Creek, it's actually 2027.
Yeah.
You know, we know what the cost is today. 6 years from now, it goes up.
Yeah.
And the number suddenly changes. And our ability to pay for it in 2026 becomes 2029. So it's a big, you know, nugget, $500,000, but the relative, you know, ease of doing it now sort of outweigh the cost for me.
The concern, though, here is, and yes, there's perverse incentives here because I don't really care about Excel's bottom line.
Yeah.
I would much rather see Excel pick up this cost, and whether the costs go up in 2026 and we have to pay more, it's not us paying more, it's Excel.
Well, when I say it's going to cost more, we might not have as much available to us. Like the forecast right now, the $72,000 a year, it's a certain number. That number isn't going to change. That will go up based on whatever 1% of our rates are, but the relative cost of undergrounding for them might become $800,000, in which case we need more money to do it.
Which is true, but I mean, if it gets to the point that we're seeing those disparities occur, then we can always pull the trigger. But I have a real hard time being able to justify that we're being proper stewards of taxpayer funds if we're leaving $500,000 on the table. Especially if this was such an emergency, why didn't we do this years ago? We're talking about this being a safety issue, and it is a safety issue, but let's not blow it out of proportion either. It is something that's been in existence since Original Town was here. I think it's proper to do it in a methodical, cost-effective way that eventually gets the services to everybody and make sure that the town is still in the best possible situation financially that it could be.
Some of us wanted to do it years ago.
So I know Clint's in favor of option 1, which is doing it all now. Ken and Laura are, I'm not exactly clear. I know you don't want to fund the costs associated with connecting to the homes. So that is what, option 3 or option 4?
For me, I'm looking at option 4, and I would even be questioning why we would be doing 2020 as our first year of construction rather than 2021, because if we do option 4 as proposed, we're still paying $62,000 as part of 2020. But if we give it another year, that's covered. So now all of that.
But then the back end shifts, right? You know, it's just
right.
2021, and then the other one's 2027.
That's right.
Right.
And that's, again, I'm looking at this purely from a financial standpoint that within, I'll say a decade, everyone is going to have the same services. It's just who's paying for those services.
And Mark, I would say I'm a little split between options 3 and 4, though leaning toward 3, doing it all at once.
Okay. And Neil and Sandy, where are you guys? I'm not clear on which option.
So, I mean, it's pretty clear, hopefully, that I'm on option 4, but it is kind of weird. I'm listening to Ken, and it's starting to resonate. I mean, effectively, what we're doing is what Excel should be doing with our taxpayer dollars. I mean, granted, if we're laying it out from the beginning, the builder would be doing this, but we're pulling it in because, well, Excel gives us a 1%. That's it, in a 3-year buy-ahead, which makes it challenging. But I am, pretty much, I'm a soft 4 right now.
Okay. Sandy? What option were you on?
I'm for 3, but if the only way I can get it done is to do 4, I could go there.
Let me back up. I'm a soft 3.
You're a soft 3. Okay.
And I would say I'm 50-50, 3 and 4. So, but I do think we need to get this done. We need to at least start getting this done sooner rather than later. I think the $500,000 is really tough for me to swallow, and that's where I'm still trying to understand how much risk is it to wait and save the money.
Right.
So, Mark?
So, I'm definitely not in favor of a local improvement district. I think if we're going to go forward with a project like this, we got a comment from Original Town resident today about why no notices went out to Original Town residents about this topic. And obviously, if we went forward with a lid, we would need to have a hearing and give them notice. But if we didn't, arguably we wouldn't have to give them notice. This is the notice. It's been a noticed meeting. And we're not hearing from Original Town residents. I'd like to, see if there's any public comment here tonight from Original Town residents to see, what they think about this. But, I think just tactically, it probably would have been appropriate for us to start the conversation with a notice given out to the Original Town residents to see exactly, what it is that they would like to see, what they would prefer.
As far as the service to the home?
No, as far as this meeting tonight.
I think everything I've heard from Original Town is they would like the lines underground, the main lines.
Okay. Yeah, well, I think that the fact that we're talking about this tonight in a board meeting, probably these types of situations, it's appropriate, I think, to give a postcard to Original Town residents, to the homeowners that are directly affected, and say, hey, we're going to be talking about this issue.
But I think, but we also had to get some basic facts down. This could have turned into just a non-event for the board, and it's like, I don't necessarily think we need to, create expectations that we're going to do something until we're going to do something. And I don't think we're going to be moving so fast as people are going to be held in the dark. Certainly more outreach is needed with Original Town, but with this, there were multiple points where we, Facebook and eBlast and others, that we announced that we were going to be having this meeting tonight. So I'm not sure how we didn't inform people. So anyway, go ahead.
I think that when we're dealing with something that's going to directly affect like a specific neighborhood, it's like the goats tonight, right? We sent out notices to the homeowners that there are going to be goats in their backyards for 42 days. Similarly, we should have sent out a notice to the resident that we're going to be potentially trenching through their yards and forcing them to spend $7,000 to $10,000 making electrical upgrades to their properties. I just think that that's a question of respect. So,
not to interrupt, we could choose to do the LID, the lid later too. So in other words, if you make a decision to move forward with the main lines and then decide later, if you get support from residents that say, yeah, we can't finance this, we need financing, please help us, because that's really what this is supposed to be, a way to finance it, then you can do that later. So there's no rush in doing that. That's just one option for financing.
Right. So I understand, we can certainly fund this out of the general fund. We could also move forward with a lid. Just generally, I don't like the feeling of a lid. I don't like the idea of imposing an additional tax on homeowners because it's a problem that we're identifying here that we're trying to solve. It just doesn't feel right. So this to me, I do agree with Clint that it makes sense that if we're going to do something like this, you do it all and get it right, because I think that if we had a situation kind of like the photos that we saw from Louisville back from October, where we had a patchwork of mains that were buried, but then the poles, now we're talking about additional poles to actually facilitate all the connections to the homes, notwithstanding the burying of the homes, the burying of the mains, that it kind of defeats the purpose of at least certainly the aesthetic improvements. While the mains wouldn't go out, you could still have, the lines going out to the homes, and it just, in terms of the tangled mess that we're going to have in the alleyways. To Neil's point, I lived in an old house in Denver that had a silver maple that was planted in 1926 that one day decided to attack us. And as we were walking into the house, it took out the line that was going from the alleyway to the home and narrowly missed us. So, it is a safety issue. I mean, the silver maple was more of a safety issue than the line, but it still remains a problem. So, but I think that Ken raises a really good point with respect to leaving money on the table. Right now we've got $1.011 million available with the $215,000 ahead. If we're accruing that at $72,000 a year to get to the full 1.58, assuming no increase in cost for inflation, that would take us an additional 8 years at $72,000 a year. I have a hard time spending taxpayer dollars when Excel dollars are available for at least a portion of the project. So I'm kind of leaning towards, let's try to maximize the amount of value that we can get from Excel, however that ends up happening. But the flip side is, I don't think that this would be a success if, at the end of the day, we buried the mains and then had a patchwork of poles and lines running to people's houses, and we don't actually have a solution. I think there you've spent a lot of money to do something halfway, and that to me just doesn't seem like it's the right solution.
So to that end, as I'm thinking about, for me, between 3 and 4, Sandy, I think, had a great point around the fact that if we do this all in one shot as far as undergrounding the mains, there is an opportunity for residents to come together to get the other costs kind of all done as a group rather than individually, when we're negotiating group discounts or whether it's an LID or something else. So that almost pushes me more toward getting it done sooner, option 3. And then really trying to provide even staff support for, can we negotiate a discount for residents to get the rest of the work done? Certainly there are economies of scale in doing this work. Even though I know many of the homes in Original Town are very different from each other, I still think that we're going to be able to potentially negotiate some good deals for our residents to go that final step if we do it all at once.
Yeah, I think the point is we haven't really had the conversation with the residents. I mean, right now we're assuming none of them want to pay to do this. Well, we know Clint did pay to have it done on the property that he owned. So we don't know. I mean, we're speculating. And so I think if we were to give a provisional commitment that we want to go forward with this, but we really need to have more conversations with the residents of Original Town and understand what is their interest. I mean, you think that most of them want to do it, but we don't know whether that means that they just want do they understand that if we underground the main lines and they don't do it to their house, that the poles are still there? Do they understand that there's a cost? So I don't really know what conversations we've had with the residents. So it feels to me like maybe we need to have a communication session with the residents of Original Town, roll this out, talk to them. I hate the concept of survey, but, see if we can get more of a commitment from the residents of Original Town of what they would like. What is their level of commitment? Do they want it undergrounded to their home, but they, are you interested if we can come up with a way to help you finance it over 20 years or something like that? I mean, if I were to find out not a single resident in Original Town is interested in spending the money to do this to their homes, then I might think very differently about this.
I would actually disagree with that. I think even if residents have mixed mixed opinions on financing the piece that goes to their home. I still think there's big value in doing the mains. I mean, I think it limits risk, particularly as, you know, even if residents today say, I don't want to pay that, I don't want power to my house, it gives future residents the option to say, I'm buying that home and I'm going to upgrade it because I don't want that risk of my house getting the power cut in a storm. And so I think there's certainly value to the town to do it sooner rather than later. Sandy, I do agree with you. I'd certainly like to hear from residents in terms of how we can help them fund the portion that goes to their home. But in my opinion, the decision to underground the mains is something that I can make just with the input I've already heard from residents.
I guess, you know, one question that I have here is, you know, what are we actually trying to do? Are we trying to get rid of the poles and make an aesthetic improvement to this neighborhood and to the alleyways?
Secondary benefit.
Or are we trying to upgrade a neighborhood from a kind of safety perspective and a continuity of service perspective? Because, you know, depending on what we're really trying to accomplish here, I mean, to me, I think that burying the mains and leaving the poles up is doing half of the job. And if that's what we end up achieving after spending, you know, millions of dollars, that seems like it's a missed opportunity.
I would agree that it's only half the job, but I think there's a lot of incentive for individual homeowners to finish the job. So while that may not get done in 2021, I think over time it will get done, and it provides benefit to those residents who choose to undertake the upgrades themselves.
And I have a very easy answer to that question of what are we trying to do here? What's our objective? When I look at this, my objective is to use the resources available to us in the best way possible. We have this Excel resource available to us that we should use in the best way possible. We should, if we've already done the rest of town, so we have but one area left, so let's use that sole resource on this area. If we're not using that resource to the best capacity possible, that's a bad decision. The real question in my mind is, if we are concerned about just doing half, and there's equity issues there about why did North Coal Creek get it 5 years before South Coal Creek, then there's also another answer. We wait another 5 or 6 years and do all of it at once. And that then gives the opportunity to do what Sandy and Laura have talked about, where we try to come up with better ways to get economies of scale with pricing for additional providers for trenching or whatnot. I mean, there's lots of good answers there. But I think, why are we talking about this? It's because the Excel 1% fund exists. We need to keep in mind that that's the resource that we're here to figure out how to best utilize, and I think that's what the real driver is. So that's my objective in this conversation.
I'm going to respectfully disagree. I mean, I think our job is, you know, if there's a need in town, is to look at all the funding sources available to us. It's great that Excel has an available fund for us to underground some of these lines, but if they didn't have that, we would still be looking at this and carving money out of the general fund to do it. You know, we do a lot of things for this town that come out of the general fund, and not specifically we have a landscape tax, we have a landscape fee, we use that for landscape services. We also have other taxes, and we have a general fund, and we kind of pull stuff out of that for all sorts of general things. You know, and I think it's okay, a dollar coming in is used for a specific resource. A different dollar coming in can be used for that resource as well. I mean, it's unfortunate that we can't borrow further ahead from Excel, and the fact that the Excel pot of money, what happens when we're all done undergrounding, it's not a great answer for me. If we literally could cut, you know, everyone's bill by the 1%, you know, once we're done with this, then this is a slam dunk for me. I mean, unfortunately, that's not the case. And I think that's why there's a lot of hand wringing here. Because if we'd spent the 560, in this case, you know, option 3, if we spent that out of the general fund and then our net aggregate residents saw a 1% reduction in their bills post 2022, I think that's a win for everybody. But the fact that the 1% continues is what's, I think, rightfully giving us all pause. And I think if Excel can find a way to help us realize that once we're done undergrounding everything in this town, there's really no reason for the town of Superior to pay in that fund whatsoever. I think that's the right place to be. or we have an alternative path, hey, community solar or something else that we can do with those funds, because arguably our town will derive no benefit from that future contribution. And that's a problem for the rest of this town.
Okay, I want to circle back to Mark and try to nail down an option if you're so inclined to do so. And then I'd like to offer an opportunity for public comment if anybody would like to do that.
I'm not sure yet. I'm kind of torn because
Okay.
I see the merit of doing it all and just getting it done right. I'm concerned about the obstacles that we're going to encounter, though, in forcing, if the city came to me and said, hey, we're going to dig through your yard and do this, I might have a problem with that. And I think that we're going to, there's always the unintended consequences that we talk about up here. I think that that's one of them. Whether that's, Excel encountering issues with trying to figure out what the location of the boxes, if the transformers are going to be, or if it's getting the trenches dug, if it's, working in combination with CenturyLink and Comcast, to get all the lines buried at the same time. It seems like it's a big project. What we're hearing is that most of these projects, at least our previous experience, is it done in a non-residential area where it's along a main arterial road where it was, clean and easy to do, where this is going to be not clean and easy to do.
Yeah, the biggest obstacle is the connection to the house, because the mains are in the alleyways, which, can be fairly straightforward.
So when we start looking at options 2, options 3, options 4, we're going to pass the cost on to the homeowners. I just don't think that we're going to get buy-in from a lot of them. And maybe that's okay. To me, it seems like it's a missed opportunity to get it all done. Because I think that from a safety and an aesthetic perspective, it's the way to do it right is to do it all at once. But I think that we're going to have, I don't know, a 30% take rate for people who say, oh, great, I'm going to do this.
It will definitely be painful, but 40 years ago, this was exactly the same conversation. Probably not the same conversation, but I'm sure there was some saying, you know what, my well and septic are great. I don't want you messing around with, I don't want to hook up to the city, but you know what? Now they've all done it. So I'd like to offer an opportunity for a public comment. Do we have any final discussion to wrap this up? Anyone public comment? Come on up to, please, if you could. Just, can you come and introduce yourself, please?
I'm Susan Bruce, and I live in Superior. What are your costs for repair per year with the downlines?
Okay,
what are your costs that you're spending every year repairing lines that are down, getting people out there? I've worked on local road programs, building highways and local roads for counties, but I don't know how you can make a final decision until you compare what your costs are repairing lines that go down that affect homeowners. What is that compared to, I mean, repairing something broken always costs more than putting something new in long term.
So if there's a down transformer, down line, Xcel Energy comes out and makes those repairs, so.
Yeah, but have you done a budget of have you done a yearly cost of what your total repairs are compared to what your cost will be? So, sorry?
It is not our cost.
Oh, it's not your cost.
No.
Okay.
No, it's Excel's cost.
Yeah.
And so they would certainly benefit from less expense with having it. And it's more of a convenience thing for residents to have less downtime and safety issues. So.
Of course. Well,
so maybe, good question if you have, but we'd welcome your thoughts on.
My thoughts are just
for it, against it.
I'm totally for it. I'm working in landscape architecture and residential design with communities across states. Architectural harmony for a community is very important. And for some people to have access and some people to have not, it creates a lot of tension. in terms of environmental concerns, well, to wait for the big one to come, just because it hasn't doesn't mean that it won't. And living in a community, not here, but in other places where there are a lot of power lines, it's very inconvenient to everybody. It's inconvenient to the Excel who's working on the lines. It's inconvenient to the homeowner. It's inconvenient to the town. People can't get to work. You know, children trying to go to school. I mean, your power's out. It's a big inconvenience. So just as a resident, I'm all for it. And I think there's a saying in the Cornell Local Roads Program, which I have been to and I have studied to some extent, there is never any cost savings of patching a problem. Either you build the road and you go all the way, and you leave the roads that are that are in disrepair, because that long-term benefit, it just doesn't equal out financially. And I don't have a lot of experience building power lines or putting power lines in, but I see a lot of similarity is from architectural harmony, from environmental concerns, to just the well-being of your community. I think it's a really good thing.
Okay, thank you for the comments. Additional public comment? All right, any additional public comment?
Can we put Paul on the spot from just a financial perspective? I know we've got a recommendation from staff, but just in terms of the budget and how this affects us this year and going forward into the future. Any of the options that you certainly would caution us to avoid?
Paul Nellis, town staff. If the board elected, I'm not intending to summarize the board's discussion, Mayor, but it sounded like maybe option 3 might be a viable option, just as an alternative, which would require the town to invest, roughly $500,000. Where would those monies come from? Is that generally one of your questions? If, in fact, the capital program, so there's money, so we have a very aggressive capital program over the 5-year period. At the end of 2020, there are funds, there's more than $500,000 in the capital fund. But if we spend $500,000 now, it would impact our capital program in future years. So effectively saying that we're spending down the capital fund in 5 years. So any expense out of the capital fund would have to be offset by either additional revenue sources or a reduction in expenses or reduction in projects. So if the capital fund then, so if we want to keep the capital fund status quo, we would have to look at another funding source. And I think the only other logical funding source would be the general fund. And what that would require us to do is go below our minimum fund balance threshold. We currently have a requirement that we keep roughly 3/4 of a year's worth of expenses in the general fund. We could potentially the board could make a decision to go below that fund balance level. And we're talking order of magnitude, there's $7.5 million as that reserve requirement. So we drop that by additional $500,000. Did that generally answer your question? One of your questions?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
If we actually, let me ask the follow-up. If we went forward with the most expensive option, which is option 1, what effect would that have on our ability from a capital improvement budget perspective and or a general fund reserve budget perspective?
On the capital side, so we don't have any revenues available over 5 years. So effectively, if we elected to spend this out of the capital fund, $1.3 million, within the next year or two, we would have to cut a like amount of project or projects. And then back to the general fund, we could in fact look at spending this out of the general fund, and then absent anything else, additional revenue, additional expenses, absent anything else, we would have to lower our fund balance requirement from 75% of expenses, probably something closer to 60% of expenses or something like that. And there's some, there would be some dialogue associated with what that means.
Okay, thank you.
think we've had a robust discussion. I don't know that we've necessarily gotten a direction here. I mean, it seems to be a prevailing direction towards at least option 3, 4. I mean, there seems to be a direction to move towards undergrounding with some additional significant dialogue with residents as to, do they even want that? How soon? And how
Yeah, I think it's important for us to have a clear direction from the board prior to meeting with residents to say, the board is giving us a direction to underground, let's say, the main lines in all of original town. And we'd like to discuss with you the costs and what it would take to get the service line to the home and what the options are. And then we can come back to the board with that information. But I think it's important to have that direction, because you're setting an expectation. If you meet with residents and say, hey, the board is, giving us direction to underground the main lines, that's what they're going to expect, at least at a minimum.
So I think it's a good idea to meet with residents. I am interested in maybe pursuing an option 5, which would be sort of a hybrid approach where I think we should seriously look at option 1, but only once we have all of the funds available from Excel. So, to the extent that we can recoup the entire cost of the main project, whether that's in 7, 8 years, once we've got the additional $72,000 per year to get to that 1.5 million that it's going to cost for the entirety of the mains project. I think in that situation, once we've maximized the value from Excel, maybe at that point it makes sense for the town to do the project all at once and to look into funding the connections to the residences with the service lines and the boxes.
But I mean, it's so far out, and it's like, why are we even talking about it?
That's like 14 years from now.
Well, it's 8 years, maybe.
No, because if we're going to do all the stuff to the home, that's 75 per home. I'm sorry, 7,500 per home. That's 10 years of the Excel budget just to cover that piece of it, plus the wait to get the.
But will Excel give us?
Excel won't pay for the rest.
We won't be able to get the money to go to the homes
No, you
from
can't
Excel.
use the service, the service lines or the
Yeah,
boxes.
so it's only going to be the 1.5 million.
Right.
I mean, not only, but we could not use any Excel dollars to go to the homes.
And even if we were to wait to get the max Excel dollars, personally, I would not be supportive of taking town funds to essentially make improvements to 100 individual homes.
Well, I think there's a need to have the conversation about the local improvement district. I think the concern is, how do you digest that amount? And initially, I think there's always a just gut reaction of, no, I don't like this idea. But frankly, it does make sense that you're giving people the opportunity to get something today, and we get to set the terms. We can provide favorable terms. We're not out here trying to make a profit off the residents. We're trying to provide this service to them is in a reasonable amount of time, but let them pay for it over a 20-year period. I mean, that's a pretty darn decent deal for the residents. It's a good way to make sure we finish the project all at once. So if we were to do an option 5, where we push this out 7, 8 years, do all of the main undergrounding at once, and then also talk to the residents, find out if that's something that they are interested in, move forward with a lid. I mean, they can get a 5% discount for paying up front. So there's a value to them right there. Mm-hmm. And if people who can't do that, they've got that 20-year financing benefit. I mean, it really is a great package. And it's the best use of the resources available to the town that doesn't come with an opportunity cost of having to take money out of the general fund or figure out what we drop from our CIP budget.
I just really don't want to spend the time talking to people about something 7, 8 years away, because a lot of those people aren't going to be there.
Sure.
And this board isn't going to be here. And to me, that's just not a good exercise in use of time, because I think we are here to decide on things that we can have an effect on today. But if we're not interested in having this happen for 7 or 8 years, let's move on and talk about something we can do this year or next year, because it's going to be a whole different picture in 7 or 8 years.
Yeah, I don't think the community engagement happens until 6 years down the road at that point. Then there's, yeah.
Right. So what's the point?
Well, we have to make a decision tonight of whether we're going to actually do anything with this money in 2020 or not. So we still had to have the discussion. But I'm with Mark. I would much rather wait until we can spend all of the fund, do it all at once. And I mean, I've heard both you guys say, let's not have a missed opportunity by leaving it half done. Let's not have extra polls when we don't need to. Well, this is the way to do it, and use the resources that are available to us without having to forego a different project.
Folks, we use money every year to benefit a particular part of town. We close a street, we open a street, we build a park. We do things all the time that benefit a particular part of town. What we're talking about is a part of our town that has been here since the beginning of the town. It's not their fault that the technology was not available to them when their homes were built. It is something we should do because it's the right thing to do. This is not something we should kick off for 6 or 7 years, because 6 or 7 years, it's going to be a completely different board. I firmly believe that this is the right thing to do to try and move. Okay, maybe we don't do it this year. We commit that we're going to do it in 2021 based on the fact that we need to get some feedback from these residents. We don't know how many of the residents really want to have this happen. Some of them may be able to pay for it right now. Some of them may be interested in financing it. Financing it over 20 years, $7,500, is not $1 million for an individual. So if it was me, I'd buy into that 20-year lid and paying this off over the next 20 years. When they sell the house, it's going to sell with the house. You know, I assume that the debt for doing it could be a levy against the house when you sell the house. I mean, I really do not believe we should kick this can down the road. We didn't kick the can down the road when we decided that it was important that we provide water services to these homes, and I think we should do the same thing on electricity.
So Sandy brought up a really good point, and I had to go back and look at my notes. You know, this board, we agreed to underground 88th Street, $400 grand. If we hadn't have done that this year, we'd had all the money for original town. The 88th Street underground absolutely benefited the aggregate members of this town. Why would we not borrow ahead against our own general fund and just take care of original town?
We're not borrowing ahead because we can't get that money back from Excel.
So, and I completely agree with that. So I think Sandy's point is this, let's for sake of argument say 2021. And I want to hear Excel come back and say what they're going to do with that 1% going forward. If they say we don't know and it's done, I'm still on board with the 0.6 million coming from the board general fund. But I do want to hear Excel explain to this town why we're going to be paying into a fund that literally benefits no one in here post 2021. If they don't have the answer tonight, great. You know, if the future is what it is, then it is.
Especially since we're going to make your life easier because all the lines in this town will now be underground.
And Craig, what I would add to that is, while I understand what the 1% fund is intended to go toward and that it might not be possible to change the policy, I'd at least like to see Excel get creative about how else we might benefit if we've made things easier for Excel.
All right, first, hi, thanks. Is it okay if I speak?
Please.
Permission to speak. Trustee Shaw, I feel it's very important for me to clarify something. The town of Superior residents do not pay into the 1% fund as a line item on their bills. It's our commitment out of our statewide O&M budget on behalf of our franchise cities to convert power lines underground for aesthetic reasons in your community at your direction. That's a fund. That's not really a fund. It's an accrual that amounts to 1% of electric revenues per year collected within the town of Superior. So it's very important to understand that there's not a line item on your bill that will go away at some point, or that is even in debate at this point. So I just hope you understand that that's the case. This is a benefit of the franchise that is provided to franchise cities. There are cities in our state territory that don't have franchises with us. They don't get the benefit of the electric underground fee. There are gas-only franchise cities within our service territory. They don't get this benefit. There are customers who live within the county, unincorporated county. They don't get this benefit. It's only towns and cities that give us franchises. So that's a very important thing for you to understand. It's also important to understand that this town is growing like crazy right now, and I don't know what the electric load is going to look like after the town center is finished, after the 2 developments east of town center are finished, but your 1% fund is going to accrue at a much more rapid pace over the next 5 to 10 years. So yeah, we're talking about $72,000 a year right now, but that's not going to be a stationary number at all. It's going to grow continually going forward. So you can see that accelerating. On this counter side to that, of course, is the longer you wait, the more expensive this gets. You know, we take these jobs out to bid. We give them to a series of potential service providers, and the lowest one gets it, right? So we're going to have to do that every 60 days if this continues as an ongoing discussion, because those bids are only good for 60 days. And it's guaranteed price of materials and labor aren't going to stay where they are right now. So I don't know if that helps you.
Yeah, Craig, actually, I really appreciate it, because you did say that at the beginning. It's a line item, and I've been misarticulating it ever since. But you're absolutely right. I mean, we all pay taxes into, large buckets where, we don't get to control any of the money. Here, at least we get the direction to control the 1% that goes into that bucket, at least until we get to that point of when we're done with the undergrounding for Superior. So I do appreciate the clarification.
Thanks.
But I do want to bring up again the point that I made to Trustee Shaw. If we had chosen not to underground 88th, we would have the money to do this right now. And I don't think any of us were involved in that decision, or were we asked to weigh which was more important to us, undergrounding 88th. Right now, we need to underground 88th. Yeah. But at the same time, this directly impacts people who live in our town right now. And while I certainly appreciate that we might be able to kick this out, to me, this is something that we owe to the residents of Original Town.
I am not at all in favor of kicking out the undergrounding of the mains. I do still think there's opportunity, Sandy, as you pointed out earlier, to talk to residents and come up with kind of what's our longer term plan for incentivizing people to go that fun. I keep referring to the last mile because I'm in transportation. I realize it's a little different here, but kind of make that final step. The fact that people in Original Town have already made these upgrades to their homes, to me, indicates that there is an interest for it. How many more people would make the upgrade if they knew that the main lines were undergrounded and that then there would be no lines in their area? I mean, that's huge incentive. So I think if we have takers right now, we'll get even more takers once we underground the mains.
Or if we provided an opportunity for them to finance it over 20 years. I mean, if somebody came to me and said they'd give me an opportunity to upgrade my windows and I could finance it over 20 years, knowing the windows in Rock Creek, I'd certainly look into it. So,
And I guess why I keep just pushing off the financing is more, I think that's a longer term discussion that we don't necessarily need to solve that part tonight. But I really want to see us move forward with the main undergrounding tonight.
So I think we've got significant direction to at least have further conversation with Original Town to say there is board interest in moving forward with undergrounding main lines. The detail of to the house is to be figured out, and that's where we need to have continued dialogue. But I think there's sufficient interest in this board supporting moving ahead with undergrounding in the near term. Am I
so maybe if
stating that correctly?
If I've heard people correctly, I think and maybe I'm miscounting the people I've heard. So I think there is less support for paying $500,000 to do it all at once, but there is support to at least do something. So it sounds like we're leaning towards option 4 right now, just aggregately across the board. If that is the case, then that's the option that Matt can also use in his public outreach, as this is what the board is considering, and then talk through there about the additional information we would need.
Well, but Ken, option 4 is splitting the town and doing half now and half 4 or 5 years later. And I don't think I have heard that 6 years later. So I don't think I have heard that consensus among the board.
Okay, I thought I had heard at least half saying they didn't want to spend the $500,000.
What I'm hearing is let's at least do the entirety of Original Town, undergrounding the mains sooner rather than later, and then the connection to the house is to be determined.
So it's option 3 with a lid investigation.
Yes.
I mean, I think we spend the next few months bringing Original Town together on their feedback on a potential lid to help finance the mainline connection.
Yeah. To be clear, I don't support this.
Yeah, I've come out to option 4. I think is the only really workable solution here that's not kind of an undue expense, but I think a lid's going to be a tough sell, personally. But I mean, if the board is leaning towards option 3 with, the investigation of a lid, if that's the direction of the board, I mean, obviously I will support it after the decision's made. But I mean, I think we're leaving money on the table. I think option 4 is the more fiscally responsible one. I just can't get my head wrapped around doing this in a piecemeal project, and I think that the only way we're going to get this done completely is by funding it entirely by the town. It doesn't seem like there's appetite to do that. So if that's off the table, I don't think a lid is going to have much appeal from the residents. I know we're talking about it right now, and I think in theory it could make sense, but I think once you actually kind of try to sell that to residents, I think that there's going to be massive backlash.
And I'd rather use the money that we would spend on lids and brain damage. I'd rather spend that on service panels and trenches.
Well, and also the time. I mean, it's going to be a huge time commitment.
It is. We're talking about 100 houses. I mean, we're not.
So I think that kind of option 4 is the only way that.
So to me, one of the big advantages of option 3 is we're asking the residents of those homes to invest and upgrade, their homes and their juncture boxes. Shouldn't we, the town, in good faith, make an investment as well and say we're willing to spend $500,000 to get the first step of this done, and then it's up to you to do the rest? To me, that's a compelling argument. Versus if we sit up here as a board and we say, well, we're not willing to pay for it, so it's going to be stretched out over 6 years and lots of pain for you and your neighborhood, but you still have to go ahead and, pay for the part at your house. That, to me, isn't a good faith investment in Original Town.
I disagree. So it's not that there's not a good faith investment. No homeowner is guaranteed to get anything at a certain time. And yes, we have pushed things up, we have prioritized projects, but generally that's for things that we don't get reimbursed for. We have to make good financial decisions. Let me roll us back to, where were we? 4 or 5 months ago when we started talking about the budget. We have more CIP projects than we have CIP funds right now. Last year in our retreat, we talked about possibly putting a ballot measure on this year to raise more funds for our CIP. We didn't even talk about this in our budgeting, and now we're talking about throwing this on in lieu of what? Throwing this on in 2020 without actually having had the conversation in a budgeting context is not good fiscal management. Leaving money on the table is not good fiscal management. We should be using the resources that are available to us to get the work done.
To me, there's a big difference in leaving money on the table. If that money were available now, I would take it.
Me too.
But there's a big difference when we're saying you have to wait 6 years and we're going to put your neighborhood through a lot of hardship where we're doing.
What hardship?
Think about the construction. Think about how in Rock Creek, we just went through that exercise where everyone was complaining about a couple little flags in their yard. And I know I was one of those where I was like, what are these dumb red flags in my yard? Think about how much more disruptive this is going to be in Original Town as they are boring through the streets and the yards. I think we should get this done once, not do it over a period of years.
Then let's push it out 8 years when we have the full funds available and do it.
I also think we need to get this done now. I think it's unacceptable to say, let's wait 8 years for this.
Okay, we also need to wrap up this discussion now, because we've been talking about it a long time, so.
So Ken and I are on option 4, I believe. Where's
Yes.
everybody else?
I've got 3, Neil, 3.
I'm on 3.
Sandy, 3. I mean, I can be convinced, I mean, I'd rather 3 than nothing, so, I mean, 1 was where I started, and I still say that's my position, but 3's better than nothing, so. So let's move with 3.
And what are we giving up? Just
Well, so if we go back to the budget, there was a certain line item that I had a huge problem with spending the money on in 2020, and that was Promenade Drive. So I pushed much harder than I expected, and the budget got turned down. That was a bit of a surprise. So we pulled 1.3 million out of the CIP budget from what was in there proposed. So we absolutely have that money available to us and staying below the reserve, but we do still have to spend the money on Promenade. I get that, and we are going to have to look for some offsets in the future. But for 2020, my feeling, and Paul can confirm if I'm wrong, I think we do have the headroom in 2020 because of the push out of Promenade.
I would feel a lot better getting behind option 3 if we put this into 2021 and actually have a budgeting conversation about what we are foregoing otherwise. If we're using general funds and CIP funds, let's have that conversation.
And this may.
Foregoing anything, though.
We're foregoing other projects. There's opportunity costs if we use town funds.
Okay, we're mid-January now. I mean, this is a big engineering project. I mean, this may take until 2021 to get this figured out from an engineering perspective. So we may be getting ahead of ourselves thinking that this is going to get done in 20 anyway. I'm leaning more towards 21 as well. I don't know why we need to rush and get this done in 20. I'd rather see it in a budget in 21. And I think from an engineering and outreach and discussion with Original Town, it's going to take a year to get this, at least to get this figured out, even in option 3. Matt?
But I think let's try for 2020. If it pushes to 2021, so be it, but let's make that decision now to move forward.
Well, I don't think we can make engineering decisions now.
Not engineering, no, but.
Yeah. Matt, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, I think, I have enough to meet with residents, let them know that the board has an interest in undergrounding the main lines, and then we have an opportunity to discuss with the residents the issue of undergrounding to the home, the costs, and the options with that, and then we can bring that back to you, as well as the financing resolution at that time.
Okay. All right, thanks. And we welcome any further comments from residents if they're watching and want to send us some, and we'll certainly be having more outreach on this as well. So thank you. All right, we're on to the favorite topic of the night. Item number 6, presentation of weed management options using goats.
Thank you, Mayor. Last year, the board had expressed a desire to move away or to stop using a certain chemical for weed management control, and we implemented that. And then staff also started discussing opportunities to other opportunities and options that we might be able to pursue for weed management. And this is one of those options. So I'll have Leslie Clark come up and introduce Mutton Busters. Mower, sorry. And then they've just got a brief presentation, 2 or 3 slides, I think, and then open up for any questions you might have.
Thank you. And I would like to invite Emily to come up, and as well as our park superintendent, Matt Rarick, because they've done most of the footwork on this. I'm just coming in on the backside. But looking at alternative methods to improve the quality of some of our open space and looking at some of the examples that our neighboring communities have used for the use of goats to help mitigate some of our noxious weeds, improve some of the quality, get rid of some of the really dense undergrowth, especially in areas that are a little hard to utilize other methods for. So some of our creek beds and areas that are not as accessible. I don't know if you want to give a short introduction.
My name's Emily McMurtry, and I am the owner and operator of Mutt Mowers. And I own a herd of goats that I do take into urban areas, and I specialize in pocket parks in the urban setting, people's backyards, municipalities, specifically Boulder. I've been in contract with them since 2014 and have a very good relationship. And my main focus, my background is environmental studies and hydrology and range management, land management. And I really wanted a way to bring more natural into the communities and give people a sense of place. And the goats really resonated with me when I started. And I found that it's not just about the goats, because they're a tool for managing weeds, but it also has brought so much community together. In Boulder, I have several projects where as soon as I show up before the goats to look at the projects, I have people saying, are the goats coming? When are they coming? They get really excited about it. But to the on-the-ground point, the goats are a great tool for managing weeds. It's about timing of the weeds, and it's about how you apply it, just like any other tool. And so that's my job, is to make sure that you are getting the best bang for your buck and to make sure that those weeds are managed.
And just to clarify that this is a pilot project, it's an experiment. We'll see how this works in a very limited area, and then take that information, move forward on recommendations on how we might better utilize that in the future, how that might affect our process across the board in other open space areas as well, how it affects the budget.
And the area we're looking at is right across from El Dorado K through 8, north of Castle Park towards Mount Soper's Way, in the south of the town.
Any other questions?
I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I had a resident ask me whether Vinny would be attending tonight, and I said I didn't think so.
I offered a baby goat to Leslie.
Leslie, you didn't take it?
I know, I respectfully declined, and it may have resulted in a shorter meeting tonight. Regret that decision.
But Vinny will be on duty.
Perfect.
So just logistically, so this is, I think, approximately a 42-day commitment for having the goats run through this area. How many goats are we talking about, and how does this work? Do you bring them, do they live on site for 42 days? Do you bring them each morning, drop them off, pick them up, or do they commute back and forth to the?
Right. So the mechanics of it is I contain the goats. With an electric, and I do have the option when I submit proposals to do a secondary, what I call my people fence, which is just a snow barrier to provide some distance from the electric fence along main thoroughfares. I do sign very well. It's oversigned because that's part of my liability with my company as well. But the goats will live on site day and night. Vinny is on duty to protect them. My main threat is dogs and people. But essentially what I will do is I will set up pastures. They'll graze in a targeted area, and then I set up an adjoining pasture, and then once we're done, we move into that one, and we just kind of move around the field that way. I can do smaller, larger, depends on where the weeds are, what we are focusing on, and the specific the details of that project.
And what should residents who live in the surrounding communities expect from a noise and a odor perspective?
Right. The goats are actually very quiet. The only time you're going to see or hear is when I'm coming on site. They know me. They're like, Mom, do you have treats? Or if I'm calling them and moving them, that's about as loud as they get, is when there's activity between pastures or when they're ready to move into their next pasture. Odor-wise, it's very low-key. We're not in an area long enough to really create a lot of scent. It's a big myth that goats smell. I will say that the breeding bucks smell because they think they're pretty hot stuff. And they're very musky, but I don't use any of my breeding animals on site. These are castrated males and females that are just more of your barnyard kind of animal.
And what sort of threat do you feel the coyotes in the area are going to pose? Is Vinny going to be able to scare them away?
Vinny does his job really well. Honestly, the coyotes are not a big threat. The electric fence is my number one safeguard against it. They can sense it. Most dogs learn very quick. If they're there, they can sense that electrical charge, and most don't get near it. I've never lost a goat to a coyote. My biggest threat is the people and the dogs. So it's not the wildlife that I'm concerned about.
And have you operated in an area that has such high coyote activity as was proposed?
Yes.
Okay. And just a question about how this actually impacts the native wildlife. So maybe, Matt, this is a question for you. Do we have any concern with whether this displaces coyotes and drives them further into neighborhoods for this 42 days or anything of that nature? Is it not that sensitive?
I believe the area is small enough. There's a lot of other drainage ways really adjacent to here, and it's kind of a short duration period when you look at it in the big scheme of the whole season.
And when would we actually be starting this?
Once we have to sign the contract and determine timeline on that, probably springtime, I'm assuming. Is that?
It depends on the weeds.
Okay.
So again, it's what weeds are you targeting, because different weeds have different methods. Canada thistle, you want to get it before it flowers. Others, you want to make sure that you graze it early. So it really depends on what weeds and what's the best practice. Typically, the grazing season is May through September, but I'm starting to book up quickly. City of Boulder has about 5 projects lined up that will have to fit 42 days in. I can also work on a smaller scale, but that's my original proposal.
And can you talk a little bit about the outreach and public education sessions that you do for people who want to come and actually see the goats, learn and meet them?
Yeah, so while the goats are working, nobody is allowed into the electrical area. That's a liability on my side. So I love to promote what the goats do for free during what we have called meet and bleat events. And so what we do is we bring out a small corral and we bring out a couple of the goats and we provide petting zoo and education session. Usually it's with Parks and Rec. They can provide some information and it's a great public outreach. Most of the events that we do in Boulder, we've had about 200 people for an hour. It's really great for the community.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that. I've heard a lot of
It's fun.
feedback. Yeah, I'll say that just the public feedback I've heard has been overwhelmingly positive about this, and I am really excited about it. Appreciate it.
So I just had a question, and you guys may have answered this, and I was just looking at your website. I think there is an emergency phone number that people can contact, if a goat somehow escapes or something. But, the cards that went to the neighborhoods, is Mutton Mowers contact information on there, or will it be there before they start?
Once we decide the timeline, once we decide we want to move forward in a timeline for this, additional information will be mailed out to those residents affected, and we'll have detailed information, emergency contact for staff as well.
Yeah, and I think the website's great because, especially around Vinny laying like a caterpillar, I think a lot of people are going to think he's dead. But if you've ever seen a llama, we do that all the time, and it's kind of normal. But we don't see a lot of llamas in town, so I think that education will really help.
And Facebook is one of my main fronts because it's an instantaneous contact and post. So
Great. I'm really excited looking forward to this.
All right, anything further?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I just wanted to say that I'm appreciative of staff of bringing this proposal to us and the fact that we're actually reaching out to the community to let them know that this is something that we're looking at. I think that this is the way that a program like this should be done, that it shouldn't be a surprise to the community that there is notice and outreach. Anytime that we have the opportunity to do something in an environmentally friendly way that is going to avoid spraying chemicals on the ground, on plants, I think we should explore that. So I think that this is going to be fun. I think the community is going to really appreciate it. So I'm looking forward to seeing the goats and seeing Vinny.
All right.
Yes.
Well, thanks for inviting me out too.
Yeah, thank you very much. I had a goat growing up, and our family had a goat growing up, so this is going to bring me back to my childhood. So very supportive, thank
And
you.
they all have names, and they all have, most of them are rescues, so they all have histories and backgrounds. So, yeah.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Oh, any public comment? Goats? Thumbs up from the gallery? Okay. All right, that was good. Thank you. All right, everybody's leaving before reports, questions, and issues. What does that tell you? Okay. That's our next agenda item, reports, questions, and issues. Who'd like to start?
I have nothing to report.
I'll go. On December 18th, ProStack held its annual sort of, I guess, member dinner, but we also took a tour of 1500 Colton Road. ProStack as a whole is really excited about the opportunity there, but that's what kind of drove my question to the board in terms of what is our programming plan, since it was really ProStack that's really concerned that we're getting ahead of ourselves with the architecture as opposed to thinking through the actual programming of the facility in conjunction with, or if not in front of, the architecture of the building. And then on the 9th of January, we had the library Board of Trustees meeting, and consistent with the town of Louisville City's new approach to community meetings. They do not, the Louisville City Council no longer participates in all of the community committees. So I think this is a board topic for us in a couple of weeks on the agenda. I'm sorry, for the retreat as far as participation. I'm a little disappointed, given that the library is sort of a joint board with RC representing the 30% of the budget that we contribute to it. But where Louisville has gone, because they have something like 40 different community committees, the community committees are going to do report outs to the board, which then creates for me a little bit of a pickle with respect to our funding contribution and our relative impact on the committee. So it's something to talk about more at the retreat, but that's about it. Thanks.
I hosted First Fridays along with trustees. Thank you. First Fridays along with trustees Kwajinski the first Friday. Trustee Ryan was also there. One of the main topics that we had was obviously the open house at for 1500 Colton. One of the suggestions that came out that was a little bit interesting to me, and I didn't know whether we might want to think about trying to pursue it, was that one of the areas of focus, well, there were two areas of focus, which was particularly a teen area and a senior area. And some of those folks who were present inquired whether it might be worthwhile to have a particular focus group discussion with some teens, maybe even taking it up to El Dorado K-8 to see if we could do it there, or with some seniors to really get a better sense of what sort of activities they might like to see happen there. It's kind of hard to plan space when you don't really know what folks want. So I wanted to throw that idea out.
Hey, Sandy, just to that point, Silk, members of Silk are planning on attending both of the community engagement meetings that are scheduled for 1500 Colton this week.
Okay, and they're a great group, but and obviously we want to hear from them, but I thought it was a great idea whether we might be able to take some outreach, maybe to El Dorado K-8, because it is our middle school and has that sort of preteen group that tend to hang out at Starbucks on Wednesday mornings in particular. So I really would like us to think about whether we might do that. And then I know we don't have a lot of seniors here in town, but it does tend to be a neglected group, and maybe if we could have some sort of a session even there that we would invite the 65 and older population to come in talk to us. That might be a great idea. I was really pleased that I think for the first time we actually had young people attend First Friday. I'd have to think hard back to when we had some middle schoolers attend, but one of the young people was actually a young man who's working on his Eagle Scout project. So he came in with some ideas for things that he might do that would benefit the town. But I really want to encourage young people. I know it's tough because you got to go to school, but you know, we do have First Fridays that aren't always on a school day. So I would like to encourage young people to do that. I attended the OSAC meeting last Wednesday, and I wanted to call the board's attention to the 2019 Raptor monitoring report, which has now been placed out on the OSAC website. There were some very interesting recommendations that have just come out of the folks who work there. But one of the most important ones was that they really want the town to be very careful about the removal of Plains cottonwoods. Those cottonwood trees are the primary source for nesting for a lot of our raptors. The recommendation was very specific that they made. Unfortunately, I do not have the minutes of that meeting, but I really, really want the town to think about it. When we get ready to remove Plains cottonwoods trees and our big trees in our open spaces, we really need to think hard before we do that. They also want to encourage us to plant Plains cottonwoods. And I know cottonwoods can tend to be a bit of a controversial discussion, but the Plains cottonwoods do not create the pollen and the cotton the way that some of the other cottonwoods do. And then the only other question I had was, since it looks like we're probably not going to be having one-on-one meetings with our various advisory committee meetings, how are we going to receive the work plans from, this was specifically asked at the OSAC meeting, will all the work plans come to us in a single packet? Will we invite the committees to come to the meeting that night to present? They just wanted some clarity on what our plan was for presenting the work plans.
The plan was to, as the committees have their work plans ready, bring them forward to the board on consent agenda. My expectation was January 27th and February 10th, I think, are the two meetings targeted for those work plans. And then the board, if they have questions or issues with the work plan, can pull them from the consent and discuss with the committee at that time.
Okay. And that is all I have to report and or ask about. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Sandy. Yep. Or I'm sorry, Ken.
So last Monday, along with Mayor Folsom and Mayor Pro Tem Lasis, I attended the legislative breakfast that was sponsored by Commuting Solutions and the US 36 Mayors and Commissioners Coalition. A lot of great presentations there, but one I want to specifically call out to the board members who weren't there that day. There was a panel of different folks representing different parts of the development and governmental aspect of development, and Chad Brew, the CEO of Brew Bacall Capital Partners, happened to be on the panel, and he is, they're the developers for Nuwatni Ridge, which is in Louisville on the ConocoPhillips property. One thing that he said that I want to make sure everybody realizes and fully understands is that we all know about Medtronic and the plan to bring them on, and that they are, in theory, going to be bringing about 2,500 jobs to that area. But he also mentioned that they're actually in talks with 5 corporate entities to host their headquarters on that property. And in combination with those 5 properties, there'll be 10,000 employees commuting daily from that area. This is something that I know we've had brief conversations at the staff level with Louisville about 88th. I know that we here in Superior have talked about making sure we're preparing 88th to potentially be a 4-lane road at one point. I truly hope this is something that we can discuss when we have our joint meeting with Louisville coming up next month, and it's something I'm going to be pushing to see if we can plant a seed and see if we can get some commitment from Louisville for the future. On Thursday last week, I attended a meeting. They had lots of good topics. One of the things that I didn't mention, but they went ahead and made a recommendation on, was they also support the goat grazing pilot program and are excited about it. And then on Saturday, I attended the Walk with a Dock event at Flatirons Crossing. I've got to say, I was incredibly surprised. I saw Lydia there. She was doing a great job with the event, and there are probably about 20 different booths there offering a variety of different services, lots of friendly faces we're all familiar with. And I've got to say, if I'm estimating, there were probably about 100 people out there who are in the food court doing synchronized stretching and then going out and doing the walk throughout the mall. It was a great event, and I was very surprised at the volume of participants. It was great, and I recommend everybody stop in and at least take a look at it at some point in the future.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Laura?
So over the winter break, I brought on an intern from Cornell University. I wanted to say a huge thank you to Brad Silver, who assisted on the survey that just went out about 1500 Colton Road. Over the last few weeks, Brad also took the lead on developing a survey that I had mentioned to all of you I'll be putting out to assess my own performance as a board member. As I mentioned in the December reports out to the community, I was really disappointed that there aren't any formal performance evaluations for board members, and also that there wasn't appetite for us to start doing this to better understand our own areas for improvement. So instead of that, this week I'll be releasing a survey to help me evaluate my own strengths and weaknesses, also assess progress against my goals of promoting smart development, fiscal responsibility, and transparent communications. Sandy already mentioned First Friday on January 3rd. Two other topics I wanted to bring up that we did address there include the Dark Sky Initiative. This is something I'm just starting to learn about, but I would certainly encourage all of you to research that as well. And also there were a lot of questions around traffic and safety, specifically how we're measuring different speeds in the community and what our remediation mechanisms are. Last Friday, January 10th, I attended the Historical Commission. The big topic there was really around our 2020 work plan. And so as Sandy mentioned, you'll see that coming soon. And finally, last Thursday, I spoke at the Boulder Area Realtor Association, along with our Chamber of Commerce, TJ Sullivan, on what's coming in downtown Superior and what people can expect. One of the topics that came up there was around affordable housing and the dearth of it in Superior. So I did mention that to Matt for potential inclusion in our next retreat.
Thanks, Laura. All right, I'll wrap up with my announcements. I want to thank the community for supporting the Sock It To 'Em sock donation program. This was our 5th year of participating in that program. We had a total of 603 pair of new socks donated. And I want to thank the Superior Youth Leadership Council for helping on Friday night at their meeting to box them up or to count them and box them up. And I'm planning to take them on Wednesday to A Precious Child, a very worthy charity and our organization in our community that a lot of our residents are supportive of and familiar with. And so they're very grateful to receive that donation. And want to make everyone aware that Boulder County Health is doing great work trying to get ahead of this youth vaping and tobacco usage epidemic that's facing the whole country, but particularly in our area, usage rates are way too high. They are doing work trying to bring the communities together to be a part of the discussion. They were pleased that Superior had been one of the first to raise the minimum age to 21, which is now nationwide, but we were ahead of that, so we were good there. But they're continuing their work, and so we're going to continue to be a part of that. So and I'm the representative that's attending those meetings, and we'll keep updating the board and the community regularly as updates are available, with kind of countywide initiatives towards that end. This is the census year. Census 2020 is in April of this year, so we'll be doing a lot of public outreach, town level, to make people aware and of the importance of filling out the census. It really generates It's the vehicle that generates dollars for all of our communities and states. And so very important that we have accurate census numbers and encourage people to get on that early and participate. And then finally, our first retreat, board retreat of 2020 is January 27th. It's the second half of our regular board meeting on the January 27th. We've got quite a list of topics that we have generated and would ask the board members to individually email Matt with your priority preferences, because we are going to need to prioritize that list. And so if you do have priorities in mind, please email those to Matt, and he'll generate a list of kind of a list in order from those replies he receives, and we'll just go through as many as we can and handle it that way. So, anyone have anything further? All right, Matt, do you have any announcements?
Thanks for mentioning the list for the retreat. I already received Mayor Pro Tem Lacis's priorities, so thank you. Just a reminder about the open houses at 1500 Colton Road building. We got first one Thursday, January 16th, 5:30 to 7:30, and then Sunday, January 19th from 1 to 3 p.m. So encourage everyone to come out and give their input.
Okay. Kendra, any announcements?
I don't have anything. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Phyllis. All right. Very good. Well, that concludes our regular meeting. We do have an executive session next. I would propose that we take a short recess before that time. Is that a good plan?
My only comment is whether we actually, I don't feel comfortable going into executive session without Trustee Ryan here, based on the topics that we're supposed to be discussing.
Okay. Well, before we take a break, only to come back and not have an executive session, do others share the same concern or feel that we should just move forward with the agenda item, which was continued from a month ago? And
I'd like to move forward since we've already continued it from December.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I spoke to Kevin on Friday night as he was dropping off his son for Silk. And, he mentioned he was going to be out of town. I asked him if there was anything that he wanted us to communicate. He didn't express, the idea that we needed to necessarily continue. So I got the impression that he was comfortable with us moving forward, and it wasn't his expectation that we should continue. I think we've already heard, his perspective at the last executive session. So we've got a lot of things to do in a limited amount of time, and we should use the time that we have allocated to this meeting to get through our agenda.
Yeah, and that was also how I read his email, was saying our intent was to pick up the executive session this week. So I admittedly didn't speak with Kevin, but I understood that as he knows we'll be going forward.
Well, we didn't continue this to another meeting because Laura couldn't be there. And I think we did.
That was not a regular board meeting. That
could have done it.
Explicit topic of 1500
And
Colton.
I have a real problem with it. In the past, we've always agreed when we're doing the town manager and the attorney's review that we would all be present. So I'm very uncomfortable that this board thinks it's appropriate to go forward with this without our entire board in the room.
But it's a different situation if we're trying to plan and schedule meetings going out into the future, like we did when, we were trying to deal with Laura's schedule in December, I think that was. Here we got notice from Kevin a couple days ago that he unfortunately was going to be unable to miss a board meeting. So I don't think that we can do our job representing our residents and defer meeting just because one of us is absent from a board meeting. I'm probably going to be absent from the February 10th meeting because I'm in trial. I would fully expect the board to continue to meet without me. So I think we should go forward and hold executive session.
Okay. All right, anything further? We'll take a break. All right, let's take a 5-minute recess and then we'll be back.